The days following Roose Bolton's death at the Dreadfort ushered in a quiet unlike any the North had known since the war began. After so many near disasters, Walder Frey's betrayal turned on its head, Tywin Lannister's defeat at Riverrun, the Ironborn occupation of Moat Cailin repelled, and finally Bolton's siege at Winterfell undone, House Stark stood triumphant, the North seemingly free of traitors. Soldiers who once fought with desperation now woke to a gentler routine. Standing watch on the walls of Winterfell, training with swords that would not need to taste blood for a time, or aiding the stonemasons who repaired the final cracks in the ancient seat of the Starks. Weeks melted into months, and talk of war shifted to talk of rebuilding. A battered peace reigned behind the thick walls that had survived countless storms. Yet no man or woman within those walls, least of all King Robb Stark, truly believed their realm was safe forever. The Lannisters still held King's Landing and the Iron Throne in Tommen's name, allied to the powerful Tyrells. Sansa Stark's fate remained uncertain, last rumored to have vanished from the capital on the night of Joffrey's murder. Arya Stark was likewise missing, glimpsed and lost somewhere in the Riverlands. Bran and Rickon, if Asha Greyjoy and the rumors were correct, had never perished under Theon's knife. Yet they remained unaccounted for, wandering or hidden. The realm might have yielded one patch of calm, but the future seethed with unanswered questions. If the fires of war had cooled in the north, that only meant the heat might rekindle elsewhere. For now, House Stark took respite in the knowledge that no foe prowled their borders. The Dreadfort was in loyal hands, with a contingent of Stark men posted there to secure the traitor's seat. The lesser houses of the north, Umbers, Glovers, Manderleys, Serwyns, Tallhearts, and more, rallied around their king, mindful of how close they had come to ruin. Some had failed to rise quickly when the war turned frantic, but now they made amends, sending food, laborers, or coin to Winterfell to help restore what was lost. Under King Robb's steady leadership, the North found itself more unified than at any time since the days of the Young Dragon or King Torrhen who bent the knee to Aegon. The first sign that a new direction beckoned came in a swirl of ravens, messages from the south, from Edmure Tully at Riverrun, from White Harbor with news gleaned from passing merchants, from the Vale's outskirts with half-glimpsed rumors. All hinted that King's Landing had grown precarious in the wake of King Joffrey's assassination. Tyrion Lannister was accused of the murder, but conflicting tales suggested he had demanded trial by combat and perhaps escaped or vanished. Some whispered that Tywin Lannister himself had been gravely humiliated or even killed by his son. Others claimed that the Tyrells now were the true powers in the capital, overshadowing the boy King Tommen. Every rumor conflicted with the next. Yet one detail rang through them all: the Lannisters were in no state to mount a swift, decisive new campaign in the north. They had enough trouble at home. For the first time in months, Robb Stark could consider turning his attention south, not immediately for war, but for the possibility of retrieving Sansa or forging alliances. He did so guardedly, for the north still had to mend its fields and villages ravaged by Bolton and the Ironborn. But late one evening in Winterfell's newly refurbished Solar, he conferred with his mother, Catelyn, and several key advisors. The Grey John, that immense and bullish lord, dominated one side of the table. Ser Wendell Manderly sat on another side, thick brows furrowed in concentration, and Asha Greyjoy, still a guarded guest of House Stark, lingered near a brazier with her wrists manacled but otherwise at liberty to stand among them. Others included representatives of House Glover and House Serwyn, who had quietly joined the meeting to share their perspectives. Robb stood by the open window, letting in the crisp northern air. His face, sharpened by the trials of war, held an almost Ned-like calm that made Catelyn ache with pride and sorrow at once. Word from Riverrun suggests that King's Landing is in turmoil. There is no firm evidence of who truly rules behind Tommen's throne. If the Lannisters are embroiled in Tyrion's scandal, perhaps the Tyrells push for more influence. Meanwhile, Myrcella Baratheon's fate in Dorne might complicate matters further. It's possible the crown is too busy to act against us. So, he concluded, glancing around the table, do we stand idle or attempt to retrieve Sansa if she's near the capital? Do we send ravens offering terms for her safe release? Or do we try something bolder? The Great John grunted. I've had my fill of Lannister bargains. If they're weakened, we should smash them. March the entire north and the Riverlands south and tear the Red Keep down. That'd free your sister in the process. A flicker of wry humor passed Rob's lips. A tempting thought, but we'd be flinging ourselves into a pit of uncertain alliances. The Tyrells are no trifling foe, nor is the crown's gold. We might rouse half the realm against us. Sir Wendell Manderley cleared his throat. Perhaps a smaller approach. Send an envoy to treat with Lord Mace Tyrell or the Queen Dowager, Cersei, if she still holds influence. We might trade certain concessions, or propose a prisoner exchange if the Lannisters hold Sansa. But in truth, we don't know if Sansa is even in their custody. He licked his lips. Some say she vanished. Some say Littlefinger took her. Others say she drowned in Blackwater Bay. Rumors are worthless until confirmed. Catelyn felt her stomach tighten at these uncertain fates. We must discover the truth. If she's truly escaped, she might have taken shelter somewhere else. The Vale, perhaps, with my sister Lisa. Rob grimaced. Lady Lisa has never been reliable. She refused to help us at earlier points in the war. Still, it's possible. My aunt might harbor Sansa if she truly fled King's Landing. He paused, thoughtful. We could send an envoy to the Eyrie to see if Lisa knows anything. That's less dangerous than venturing straight to the capital. The Great John rumbled a half-approving noise. Safer, yes. The Vale is a fortress of mountains. But is Lisa friend or foe? Catelyn looked pained. She is my sister. But her fear and distrust of outside entanglements might keep her from revealing Sansa if she's there. Or she might try to use Sansa's presence as a bargaining chip. I can't say. She's changed since we were children. Rob nodded. One problem at a time. We cannot simply ride into the Vale with an army, but perhaps a small diplomatic mission. He turned to Asha Greyjoy, surprising the onlookers. You've traveled widely by sea. Could you slip a group of us into Gulltown? Then up the high road to the Eyrie. She blinked, shrugging. I might if you gave me a ship, but you keep me prisoner. Do you trust me not to vanish once we set sail? Rob studied her a moment. You've had opportunities to betray us here and didn't. We might offer you conditional freedom in exchange for your help. If you abscond, the Ironborn will remain our enemies. If you stay the course, we might let you depart with a pardon for your father's war. Some in the room bristled at the idea of trusting an Ironborn woman. Asha arched a brow. Bold, my king. We'd have to hammer out details. But if it means I can sail again, I'll consider it. And I've no love for Euron or further raids in the north. Catelyn frowned, uncertain. But she recognized that Asha's knowledge might indeed be valuable. In any case, that's one possibility, she said, turning to the Great John. Though we must weigh whether King's Landing or the Vale is the better route to find Sansa. Rob set a hand on the window frame, tension in each line of his body. We'll discuss it further. For now, the priority is ensuring the North is stable. My Aunt Lisa might not respond favorably to an unexpected visit. Let's send a raven first, gauging whether she has Sansa or Arya or any knowledge of them. If she gives a positive reply, we consider a mission. The Great John and others consented, though a hint of frustration lingered among those who wanted direct action. The meeting wound down, leaving the question of Sansa's rescue to remain in limbo. Yet a seed had been planted. Perhaps diplomacy, not war, was the next step. The North was war-weary, after all, and rallying a vast host to break King's Landings or the Vale's walls might destroy all the unity House Stark had just reclaimed. In the following weeks, ravens flew from Winterfell to the Eyrie, to Riverrun, even discreetly to King's Landing, though the latter required circuitous routes and careful phrasing. Rob wrote a polite but firm letter addressed to the Crown, requesting any knowledge of Sansa Stark's whereabouts and implying that her safe return might open an avenue for peace. Some days, he confided to Catelyn that it felt naive to ask the Lannisters for cooperation after all that had happened. But it cost him little to try. If the realm's new caretaker, whoever that truly was, wanted stability, they might be open to releasing Ned Stark's eldest daughter. Meanwhile, a new current of activity stirred Winterfell's courtyards, less about war and more about governance. Lesser lords arrived to swear fealty in person, deliver seeds for spring planting, or petition for the king in the North's favor in local disputes. Where once these halls had rung with swords clashing in frantic defense, they now echoed with the more mundane rhythms of a functioning seat. Robb handled it with a composure that reminded Catelyn of her late husband, mild but firm, never raising his voice unless absolutely necessary. The people of the North, battered by war, found solace in such steadiness. Though the war had softened in the North, that did not mean the martial side disappeared. Each day, archery drills and sword practice continued. The Great John would not let men slack. "We stay sharp in case the Lannisters come," he'd bellow. Some knights scoffed that the Lannisters were too fractured to march north soon, but the Great John answered, "They've gold. And gold fetches armies of Sel's words if they desire it." So the training yards remained lively, though with fewer anxious faces. Amid this lull, Catelyn noted that Asha Greyjoy had grown oddly integrated into the castle routine, albeit still under watch. She took her exercise in the training yard, sparring with wooden swords. She conversed with the blacksmith about forging a new blade that might fit her style. Now and then she sat with the maester to read old tomes about naval charts. When asked what she was doing, she'd reply with a wry smile that she might eventually get to sail again, so best keep her mind sharp. Some of the more hot-headed Northmen resented her presence, but others, recalling that she had not personally butchered Northerners and that she'd surrendered peaceably, found grudging respect for her skill. Catelyn herself remained cautious. The Ironborn had caused great grief, Theon's betrayal chief among them. Yet in moments she recognized a certain kinship in Asha's loss. War had robbed them both of family ties and illusions. Asha had lost her father, her brother Theon was rumored to have been captured and mutilated by the Boltons or missing entirely, and her entire home was locked in a Kingsmoot far away. She was as rootless as Arya or Sansa might be. Occasionally, Catelyn found herself exchanging a few quiet words with the Ironborn woman, each moment tinged with mutual wariness but also empathy. Perhaps in a realm so fractured, small seeds of understanding could blossom. At length, ravens returned. 2 arrived from the Vale. One was from the Ares Castellan, politely informing Robb that Lady Lysa was indisposed and had no knowledge of Sansa Stark. The second, more cryptic, arrived from Peter Baelish Littlefinger, who apparently held some position near Lysa. It bore honeyed words about wishing for future harmony between the Vale and the North, with no direct mention of Sansa. Robb read it with an exasperated snort. Baelish always has a game. This doesn't confirm or deny her presence. He wants us in the dark. From King's Landing came only silence, no reply to Robb's request. Some rumored that the crown scribes were too busy with royal weddings or Lannister infighting to answer northern ravens. Others suspected the letter was intercepted. Either way, no clarity emerged. The realm's chaos kept Sansa's fate hidden. In a private conversation with his mother, Robb weighed the Vale possibility. A small mission might glean more. But marching an army to the Bloody Gate would provoke Lysa. Do I risk a handful of men vanishing among those mountains? If Baelish is near her, we can't trust a single word. He might seize our envoys for his schemes. Catelyn grimaced. True. I know my sister's fear. She might treat your approach as a threat. She's always refused outside entanglements. Unless we have a certain sign Sansa is there, we risk an expedition for naught. So they let the matter rest again, turning to simpler tasks, forging alliances with the local lords for the next harvest, ensuring House Reed's crannogmen patrolled the neck to guard against straggling Bolton loyalists, and continuing to nurture the battered farmland around Winterfell. Plots of earth were plowed for spring barley or oats, families busy in the fields. The sense that the North was healing blossomed in each new green shoot. All the while, men told stories in the great hall at supper. Some recalled the Red Wedding fiasco, painting Walder Frey as a fool undone by his own designs. Others recounted how the Bolton siege at Winterfell turned into another Stark victory. Northern bards began weaving ballads about the young wolf, forging a mythic image around Robb. Catelyn heard them with a mix of pride and dread. Mythologizing a living king was dangerous. She remembered how men had called her husband Ned the Quiet Wolf and how he died powerless under Joffrey's tyranny. She prayed the realm would not contrive another tragic end for her son. Then, on a mild spring afternoon, a visitor arrived unexpectedly from the direction of the King's Road, a grizzled man wearing black. At first, watchers thought it might be a black-clad Sellsword, but as he rode nearer, they saw the unmistakable garb of the Night's Watch. The gates opened to him. He dismounted, stiff from travel, and requested audience with King Robb. His name, he said, was Donnell Hill, a ranger from Castle Black, bearing tidings from the Lord Commander. A hush settled, for news of the Night's Watch had been scarce since the war began. Robb received him in the Great Hall, flanked by the Great John, Catelyn, and a handful of others. The ranger bowed, though awkwardly, as if in used to courts. Your Grace, the Lord Commander begs your attention. Word is, you hold the north again. We have troubles beyond the wall. A hush followed. Most present had heard rumors about wildlings stirring or Stannis Baratheon rumored to be at the wall, but little was confirmed. Robb's tone was serious. Speak plainly, brother. We owe the watch any assistance we can muster if the threat is grave. Donnell Hill exhaled. Aye, well, Lord Commander. He's a newcomer, Stannis Baratheon, styling himself king, but forging an alliance with the watch to repel a wildling host led by Mance Rayder. They say the wildlings are partly subdued, but the winter is harsh, and rumor claims darker things roam in the far north. The watch is undermanned. We can hold the wall for now, but Lord Commander Stannis, if I can call him that, requests the north's support. Some houses near the new gift or the last hearth might help. If the White Walkers are real, or if the wildlings break free again, we cannot stand alone. A ripple of apprehension coursed through the hall. White Walkers. Some men scoffed under their breath. The others were legends fit for bedtime tales. But the ranger's drawn face suggested he believed it, or at least believed in the possibility. Catelyn's gaze flickered to Robb. She remembered Ned's old stoic warnings that winter was more than just cold. None of them expected the old nightmares to rouse. Yet here was a message from the Watch, begging for help. Robb set his jaw torn. The realm had battered him with so many crises already. Stannis is one of the claimants to the Iron Throne. He marched north. Aye, your grace. He answered the Watch's call when we were most desperate. He overcame the wildlings at the wall. But Stannis still calls himself rightful king, hoping to rally the north behind him perhaps. He demands fealty if we want his continued protection from wildlings or worse. That rubs some in the Watch the wrong way. But we can't deny he saved us from Mance Rayder's invasion. The Great John let out a snort. Another southern king come to claim the north? We already have one king and he stands here. If Stannis thinks to overshadow House Stark, he's as mad as Ares. Donnell Hill shrugged helplessly. That's as may be. I only relay the call for help. Our supply lines are meager. The Watch is short on recruits, and winter has hammered us. If you or your bannermen can spare anything, grain, men willing to join the Watch, or even recognition of Stannis's cause, Castle Black might hold out. If you do nothing, the next wildling threat or worse might get through. Robb's shoulders tensed. I understand. The Night's Watch is an ancient ally. Will not abandon you. But nor can I simply kneel to Stannis after all the North has suffered to carve our own destiny. He glanced around. We must consider carefully. The threat from beyond the wall could overshadow everything else. If it's real, that is. Once the ranger was led away to rest, Robb convened a swift council in the solar. Catelyn, the Great John, Ser Wendell Manderly, and others listened as he weighed the quandary. We've reclaimed the north, but we're not brimming with surplus men or food. We can't mount a large expedition to the wall. Yet if the threat of wildlings or these rumored White Walkers is real, ignoring it could be fatal. Also, we have to worry about Stannis demanding fealty. The moment we approach him, does he expect me to kneel? Or can we form a pact as equals? The Great John spat. You are king in the north. No man from the south demands your crown. We refuse that from the Lannisters, from Joffrey, from Tommen, and from any upstart. If Stannis tries it, we show him our steel. Catelyn frowned. We have bigger foes than Stannis Baratheon if these legends hold any truth. Stannis at least is no friend to the Lannisters. He might be an ally if approached carefully. But we must not kneel, nor must we start a new war. Perhaps we can send a modest force north to the wall, enough to help the Watch without binding ourselves fully to Stannis's cause. Ser Wendell Manderly nodded. A token of goodwill, so to speak. Some grain and supplies, a handful of able-bodied men. It'll show we respect the Watch and are mindful of the danger. Let Stannis see we're not enemies unless he forces us to be. Thus it was decided. House Stark would dispatch a small envoy to the wall, carrying wagons of provisions, some arms, and half a dozen lesser knights who might join the Watch if they so chose. They would also bring a letter from King Robb, politely greeting Stannis as an ally in the battle against the terrors beyond the wall, while stopping short of acknowledging him as King of the Seven Kingdoms. In effect, a cautious olive branch that said, we recognize your role here, but we will not kneel. If you aim to fight the Al horrors in the far north, the north will not stand idle. A flurry of preparations followed. The Great John, ironically, had no interest in traveling so far, grumbling he'd had enough of snow and was more needed in Winterfell. Instead, Sir Wendell Mandoley volunteered to lead the column up the King's Road to Castle Black. He had a stout constitution and a reputation for courtesy that might soothe any friction with Stannis. A few younger Umbermen joined eagerly, seeing it as an adventure or an honor to support the watch. Within a fortnight, they set out, wagons laden with sacks of grain, barrels of salted fish, and freshly forged arms. The men wore the direwolf sigil proudly, braced for a new frontier. Catelyn watched them depart from the ramparts, heart uneasy. The realm was a patchwork of potential alliances: Stannis in the far north, the Lannisters in the south, the Tyrells in King's Landing, the Vale closed off, and the Ironborn still unsettled. But at least House Stark was taking a step that might avert another cataclysm. Not long after this mission left, life at Winterfell resumed its weaving between peace and vigilance. In the yard, a sense of routine had taken hold. Farmers streamed in and out to petition for seeds. Women from the nearby holdfast delivered cheeses or eggs, seeking coin or protection. The red walls of the Great Hall, partially blackened by Theon's sacking, now stood repainted in certain sections, giving the impression that Winterfell shed its scars day by day. Even the southwestern breach, the site of Bolton's assault, was seamlessly integrated with new stone. If not for the lingering scorch marks on certain towers, a newcomer might never guess the horrors visited upon the seat. One afternoon, Catelyn made her way to the library tower, determined to see how the salvage of ancient scrolls progressed. She found the old septon from White Harbor overseeing a pair of novices who carefully dried parchment pages and stored them in wooden cases. The musty air reeked of old ashes. Broken shelves remained in corners, but the main aisle had been cleared. A battered table held relics of Winterfell's history: genealogies of Stark forebears, maps of the North, treatises on the worship of the old gods. Catelyn handled them gently, mindful that the castle's knowledge was as critical to the realm as its swords. In mid-inspection of a half-burned volume on the Age of Heroes, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Asha Greyjoy appear, flanked by a single guard. The Ironborn woman inclined her head in greeting. "My lady, didn't expect to find you here." Catelyn set the volume aside. "I often come to see what can be saved. House Stark has always valued learning." Asha glanced around the broken shelves. "Your men said I could read if I wished. Didn't have much taste for these dusty ledgers. But, well, there's not a wealth of pastimes for me outside the yard." She eyed the novices fussing over an old chart. "You might want to store that differently. Salt, air, or damp can ruin it. I've seen maps degrade in a fortnight at sea if not wrapped properly." The septon turned, somewhat haughty, but Catelyn gave a small smile. "She's right about humidity. Misting the edges might help preserve them if we pack them in oilskin." Then, to Asha, "I gather you have some experience at sea." Asha smirked. "Spent half my life on a longship. I know a bit about preserving charts, if nothing else. Though your climate's different from the Iron Islands. Less salt, more ice." For a moment, the two women stood in an odd camaraderie, the old septon blinking uncertainly at the suggestion that an Ironborn reaver could help preserve books. Asha raised her shackled hands to demonstrate she couldn't easily hold the parchment. The guard frowned but allowed her to approach the novices. She offered a short demonstration of how to roll and wrap a chart in oilskin. The novices, startled, listened raptly. Catelyn watched, feeling the strangeness of a moment where old enemies collaborated to save knowledge. After a short while, Asha stepped back, rolling her shoulders. The guard moved to her side as if nervous that she might fling a candle into the shelves, but her posture showed no aggression. She turned to Catelyn. "My father used to scorn books. He said knowledge meant nothing if you couldn't hold a sword. But I always believed knowing the sea was half the battle." Catelyn studied her. "Your father's outlook did the Iron Islands no favors in the end. You survived him. Perhaps there's more to your story." Asha's expression tightened, a moment of pain in her dark eyes. "He left a legacy of stubborn war undone by you Starks. I suppose I owe no loyalty to that path. Still, the Iron Islands are all I knew." Catelyn nodded, a flicker of empathy stirring. "War devours us all. Perhaps in the times to come you might find a new course, helping the North or forging peace with us. If you've grown weary of raids." Asha let out a long breath. "I'm done with Euron's madness, certainly. If you free me eventually, I might roam, find a quiet cove. Or I might sail south, see if the Stepstones offer a new life. But for now I'm here." She cast a final glance around the library, acknowledging the novices who eyed her with mingled wonder and caution, then dipped her head at Catelyn. "I'll leave you to your books, my lady." She pivoted and strode out, the guard trailing. Only the soft rustle of parchment remained behind, overshadowed by the swirl of conflicting thoughts left in Catelyn's mind. Perhaps letting an heir-born prisoner roam free in the keep was folly, but so far, Asha had proven more ally than threat. At supper time, the hall thronged with the usual array of minor lords, guards, stonemasons, and returning scouts. The conversation buzzed around the progress of spring planting, the slow meltdown of roads, and the rumor that the Vale might soon hold a wedding for Lord Robert Arryn. Others speculated about the goings-on in King's Landing. Some insisted Cersei had seized more power, others said Kevan Lannister or the Tyrells had overshadowed her. In any case, the capital's silence regarding Sansa continued. Catelyn found it infuriating and heart-wrenching. So near to war, so far from solutions. Time marched on, weeks turning to the cusp of summer. The last pockets of snow retreated into the high hills. Northmen who had once gathered to fight the Boltons now turned to their fields in earnest, hoping for a bountiful harvest to replenish the war-ravaged land. In early dawn light, farmers traveled to the outskirts of Winterfell, guiding oxen or mules to pull the plows. Between the ragged furrows of the farmland, wild grasses sprang up. Women and children gleaned seeds for bread, stoic amid the dryness left behind by receding frost. Under King Rob's gentle but firm edicts, no one starved, though none feasted lavishly either. Then, a fresh set of riders arrived from the wall, bearing the stark dire wolf banner. Ser Wendell Mandully had returned from the mission to Castle Black. Catelyn joined Robb in the courtyard to greet them, a swirl of onlookers gathering to hear the news. Ser Wendell dismounted, exhausted but triumphant. "Your Grace," he said, bowing low, "I bring word from the Night's Watch and from Stannis Baratheon. They received your gifts, food, men, and your letter. The Lord Commander thanks you for honoring your forefathers' bond with the Watch. As for Stannis," he paused, uncertain how to phrase the next part. "He acknowledges you as king in the north for the moment. He calls himself king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Yet he says if your forces keep the watch and do not hamper his fight against the wildlings, he will not press the matter of your fealty immediately. He is tolerant, if not friendly." A murmur spread. Catelyn felt mild relief that Stannis had not demanded immediate submission. Another conflict was the last thing they needed. Robb nodded, expression measured. "That's more than we hoped. And the Night's Watch, did you see signs of trouble beyond the wall?" Ser Wendell's face darkened. "The wildlings are scattered, but the men I spoke to claim strange sightings in the far north. Stannis sets up at the wall, proclaiming the need to guard against another threat. Hard to parse rumors from truths. But the Watch is desperate for more resources. They hoped you might send further supplies later in the year. They also asked if any criminals in the north might be spared the noose and sent to the Watch to bolster their ranks." Robb frowned. "We have few criminals left, mostly minor thieves or such. But we can consider it. The old tradition of letting men take the black in lieu of execution stands. We want the Watch strong if these others are real." With that, Ser Wendell and his men were escorted inside to rest. In the great hall that evening, they spoke further of the conditions at Castle Black, the gloom, the battered fortifications, the meager morale. Stannis, they said, was a stern figure, prone to talk of rightful claims. He made it clear that once the threat in the north was contained, he intended to press his kingship throughout the Seven Kingdoms. For the time being, however, he left the north alone, likely aware that House Stark would not bend easily, and he needed them as a bulwark against wildlings. It was a precarious détente, but better than open war. Once again, the months drifted, and with them came summer's warmth. After years of near-perpetual chill, the north blossomed under mild suns. Streams rushed, birds filled the skies. The farmland near Winterfell turned green, dotted with early crops. Surplus began to appear in the barns. A sign that House Stark's dominion had stabilized enough to feed not just the castle but the surrounding lands. Fewer travelers arrived begging for bread. Some came to trade for cloth, metal, or livestock. The stories of war receded from daily talk, replaced by hope that an abundant harvest might finally let the north breathe easy. With the realm so calm, the older knights pressed Robb about future alliances. The great Jon insisted that if Tywin Lannister was truly weakened, the North could lead a combined push with the Riverlands to dethrone the Lannisters altogether. Others argued that taking King's Landing was a fool's errand if the Tyrells still favored the crown. Ser Wendell recommended more letters to see if Mace Tyrell was open to negotiations. "We might trade them neutrality for Sansa's safe return if they hold her," he suggested quietly one evening. But we don't even know if they do. Catelyn found her son in the solar that night, poring over half-written dispatches. Gray wind curled at his feet, eyes half closed. Robb's expression was a study in weariness. He looked up as she entered, giving her a faint smile. "Mother, sometimes I envy simpler kings. If only it were all hunts and feasts." She moved closer, scanning the scattered parchments. Some were letters to Edmure Tully, to the Vale, to White Harbor. Others touched on trade deals with Bravos or Lorith, seeking coin to rebuild. She let out a soft sigh. "Your father disliked the burdens of lordship too, but he bore them. You do the same and more." Robb sat back, rubbing his temples. "I keep circling one question. Do we dare try a rescue mission for Sansa? With the realm so scattered, a small band might slip into the capital, or find her if she's truly with the Vale or with Baelish. But that could lead to a covert war we might not win. Alternatively, do we try to contact Tyrell envoys seeking to confirm her whereabouts? But the Tyrells might bargain us into a corner." Catelyn sank onto a nearby bench. "I wish I had an easy answer. We've come so far, lost so many. The thought of risking more men in a venture that might be fruitless terrifies me. But I yearn to see your sister safe." Her voice shook with longing. "I cannot abide the thought of her captive or alone in that viper's nest of a city." Robb's gaze fell to the table. "I know. If I had the slightest clue where she was, I'd ride for her myself." A hush passed. "Let me consider a discreet approach. We might find a cunning volunteer to infiltrate the Vale or King's Landing, seeking rumors. But we can't tie it too closely to House Stark. I'd not risk open war if we can avoid it." She agreed gently, though her heart ached that so many children of House Stark were scattered like seeds on the wind. Even as the North prospered, the family was incomplete. Yet that had become the cost of war. No one truly emerged unscathed. Ned's face seemed to hover in her memory, silent and resolute as it had been in the crypt. She prayed the old gods might deliver a kinder future. Amid these ruminations, the daily life of Winterfell thrived. Tournaments were out of favor as resources were better spent on farmland or fortress repairs, but minor contests of arms took place in the yard. Peasants cheered as knights tested their skill with blunted spears or archery at straw targets. Robb sometimes presided, awarding small tokens to the winners. Morale soared. In a poignant moment, the battered rampart where Bolton's archers once rained death was turned into a vantage for children to watch these friendly matches. Few in the crowd missed the symbolism. The castle that had endured betrayal now hosted something akin to normalcy. One clear morning, a hush fell over the courtyard when a single distant horn call echoed from the gates. Men rushed to see who approached. The watchers soon shouted that it was a large group flying the Mallister sigil from Seaguard, traveling with Tully banners. The gates swung wide. Robb stood in the yard, flanked by the Great John and others, as the Mallister men rode in, proclaiming they came from Riverrun bearing Edmure Tully's greetings and an important visitor. Hearts quickened. Was it Edmure himself? Or Brynden the Blackfish? But the party parted to reveal Rosalind Tully, Edmure's wife, heavily pregnant and riding in a small covered wagon for comfort. By her side stood Edmure Tully in full armor, looking both proud and anxious. A wave of emotion rippled through onlookers. Robb hurried forward, calling, "Uncle Edmure," with relief in his voice. Edmure dismounted, embraced Robb warmly. Catelyn, who had just arrived from across the yard, found herself near tears at seeing her younger brother again. She rushed to him, ignoring all protocol. He enveloped her in a heartfelt hug. Behind them, Rosalind Tully emerged from the wagon, assisted by a pair of Mallister knights. She looked weary but smiled upon spotting Catelyn. "My lady," she said, dipping her head, "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. Edmure insisted we come north for a time, away from the Riverland's uncertainties." She placed a hand on her swollen belly, as if to show the reason. Catelyn composed herself, gently clasping Rosalind's hands. "You are most welcome, dear. Winterfell stands open to all Tully kin. Has trouble stirred again in the Riverlands?" Edmure's face clouded. "Not immediate war, but Tywin's shadow lingers. Bandits roam near the Golden Tooth. Riverrun is stable, yet we fear a lull before some new storm. I wanted Rosalind safe, and we guessed the north might be the best place. Also, I long to see you and Robb." Robb nodded, beckoning them inside. You'll have every comfort we can offer. This is a pleasant surprise indeed. Let's speak more privately. They retired to the great hall, leaving the lesser lords to settle in the courtyard. Over a light meal, Edmure explained that the Riverlands were caught between tenuous peace with the Lannisters and the underlying threat that King's Landing might reassert control if Tywin regained his footing. Brynn and Tully still commanded Riverrun's defenses, and local lords like Blackwood and Bracken offered uneasy support. We might hold out another year, maybe two, if the crown remains distracted, Edmure said. But eventually, some force might test us. I came to see if, together with the North, we can form a plan, maybe with the Vale, or even Dorne, whoever might stand against the Lannisters. That is, if you're so inclined to rejoin the larger conflict. Robb glanced at Catelyn, then at the Grey John. We've discussed forging alliances, but the North is weary. We can't plunge into open war again unless forced. My father taught me to choose battles carefully. Edmure let out a resigned sigh. I understand. I only hoped. The Riverlands alone can't bring Tywin to heel. Without your might, we remain a buffer region. But I respect your caution. Rosalind, hands resting on her belly, cleared her throat shyly. If it helps, we hear that King's Landing is truly at odds with itself. The Tyrells press for advantage, the crown's coffers run dry. King Tommen is a child. If there were a time to unify and press them for fair terms, like returning Sansa, it might be soon. She paused, meeting Catelyn's gaze apologetically. I only wish the news of Sansa's disappearance were clearer. Many in the South whisper she was hidden away or wed to some suitor. None can confirm. Catelyn's throat tightened, but she managed a nod. We remain in the dark. No letter from her, no message from the Red Keep. She forced a small smile. But thank you for telling me, Rosalind. Despite the looming uncertainties, the arrival of Edmure and Rosalind brought a sense of familial warmth to Winterfell. Catelyn guided them through the corridors, showing how repairs had progressed since Theon's sacking and Bolton's siege. Rosalind exclaimed softly at the sight of charred towers, praising how well the Starks had reclaimed the place. Edmure kept glancing out the windows, marveling at the northern landscape, the stretches of farmland dotted with fresh shoots, the training yard bustling with archers. He had visited Winterfell once in his youth, but never had it felt so alive, so hard-won. That evening, a modest feast was held in the great hall to honor their guests. Tables filled with fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and salted meats from the new harvest. Meat and ale flowed, though not in reckless abundance. Edmure thanked Robb for the hospitality, praising the North's resilience. Men from the Riverlands and the North mingled, exchanging stories of Tywin's defeats and Bolton's downfall. Laughter merged with the strum of a single lute. The warmth in that hall reminded many of older days, before the war, when House Stark hosted gatherings in simpler times. Near the dais, Catelyn sat with Edmure and Rosalind, catching up on Riverrun gossip. The Blackfish, it seemed, had grown a touch more reclusive, focusing on drilling the men and patrolling the fords. Tensions with House Frey still simmered, though none dared openly rebel since Walder Frey's demise at the Red Wedding fiasco. Rosalind's father, Lord Walder, had died in that same trap, undone by his own cunning turned awry, leaving the Frey brood in disarray. Some had sworn unconditional loyalty to Edmure, others seethed. But for the moment, the twins were quiet. They know we have your alliance, Edmure said, and none dare provoke it. Robb joined them after a time, gray wind at his side. Polite conversation drifted toward the future. Edmure ventured, if King's Landing keeps ignoring your ravens, perhaps you can approach the Tyrells directly. They might see advantage in dealing with an independent North. Some trade pacts, mutual recognition. They loathe the Lannisters but remain tethered by Marjorie's marriage to Tommen. It's complicated. Robb listened thoughtfully. It might be a path. For now, we watch. The realm might unravel without us lifting a sword. Or perhaps a new threat emerges that forces us to pick a side. Rosalind gently touched her belly, wincing as if the child kicked. I only pray the babe is born into a calmer world. So much blood has been spilled. Let it end if the gods are merciful. Catelyn squeezed her hand. Amen to that, child. As the feast wound down, men trickled away to find rest. Edmure escorted Rosalind to comfortable chambers arranged near the keep's warm core, mindful of her condition. The Great John stumbled off to regale new arrivals with tales of the Dreadfort. A hush settled over the hall, flames guttering in the braziers. Catelyn lingered with Robb, each finishing a last sip of watered wine. She gazed around the once-ruined hall, now vibrant with color and the gentle murmur of hope. We've come so far, she whispered. Robb placed a hand on her shoulder. And we've so far still to go. But for tonight, let's be grateful. The North stands intact. Our foes are scattered. We hold the seat once threatened with ruin. She leaned her head against him. I am grateful, truly. And we carry on for the sake of the family we've lost or scattered. Ned would be proud. He said nothing, only nodded. In the flickering torchlight, for a heartbeat, Catelyn saw a faint reflection of Ned's solemn features in her son's face, an echo of the quiet stoicism that had once defined House Stark's lord. Then the moment passed, replaced by the future's uncertainty. They parted, each seeking rest in the battered castle that had become a testament to survival. In the next days, Edmure shared more details of Riverland's politics. Some lesser lords had begun bickering among themselves again, haggling over boundaries or bragging about old feuds. Brynda and Tully reined them in with an iron will, but there was a sense that unless the Lannister threat truly ended, the Riverlands would remain a land on edge. Robb considered sending a northern contingent to help garrison Riverrun, but the Great John argued that the men needed rest after so many campaigns. Edmure assured them that Riverrun did not face immediate invasion. Any Lannister muster must first quell its own palace intrigues, he said drily. Meanwhile, Rosalind rested, awaiting the birth of her child. Catelyn doted on her, remembering her own pregnancies with a pang of nostalgia. She found comfort in guiding Rosalind through Winterfell's Godwood, letting her feel the warm steam from the hot springs. It was a quiet solace amid a realm still recovering from war. Rosalind confessed that she sometimes dreamed of Frey archers turning on her, or of marriage feasts soaked in blood, but awakened relieved to be safe in the north. Catelyn understood the lingering nightmares, they all had them. The child came sooner than expected, one stormy night with thunder rumbling across the wide northern skies. Cries rang from the bedchamber as Rosalind labored, Edmure pacing frantically in the corridor. Catelyn and an old midwife tended her, offering soothing words, wiping sweat from her brow. Outside, men gathered, anxious. After agonizing hours, the baby arrived, a boy, red-faced and wailing, a new scion of House Tully. Edmure burst in, tears in his eyes, kissing Rosalind's damp brow. Catelyn wept, holding the babe with trembling awe. In a world battered by war and heartbreak, here was new life untainted by betrayal. Word of the birth swept the castle. Men cheered to have a Tully child born under Winterfell's roof, a sign that the alliance between the Riverlands and the North was deeper than mere necessity. Robb visited soon after, beaming at the sight of his newborn cousin. Welcome, little one, he murmured, gently stroking the infant's cheek. May you live in a realm kinder than we've known. Edmure, delirious with relief, proposed a naming feast once the mother recovered. Rosalind, though pale and exhausted, agreed shyly. He shall be named Hoster, after my lord father, Edmure declared, ignoring a faint grimace from Catelyn at the memory of their father's final days. She accepted it with grace. Let a new Hoster Tully have a fair chance at a better world. Indeed, a naming feast was planned, modest but joyful. Servants scurried to gather what fresh produce the farmland could spare. Barrels of ale and mead were tapped. Lively tunes rung in the great hall. Winterfell's inhabitants turned out in droves to celebrate something purely hopeful. The banners of Stark and Tully fluttered side by side, a living testament to the unity that had saved them from so many storms. In the hush before the feast began, Catelyn lingered in the corridor outside Rosalind's chamber, ensuring the mother and child were comfortable. She found Asha Greyjoy there too, an awkward onlooker, the guard at her side. Came to see the fuss, the Ironborn woman muttered, half defensive. Curious. We don't have many naming feasts in the Isles, some do, but it's simpler. We're spoils, not babes. Catelyn gave a tentative nod. Such traditions differ, yes. Would you join the celebration? Robb said you could if you abide by the guard's presence. Asha shrugged. Might as well. The alternative is sitting alone, listening to the yard's chatter. She paused, glancing at the closed door to Rosalind's chamber. Congratulations to the Tullies. War or not, a child is new life. The unexpected sincerity in her tone moved Catelyn. Indeed, we must cherish what remains of innocence. She gestured for Asha to follow her to the great hall, the guard trailing. For a moment, the older woman and the captive Reaver walked side by side, united by a fundamental respect for survival and the fragile potential a newborn represented. The naming feast started that evening. Torches blazed bright, the hall brimming with laughter and music. Edmure gently carried baby Hoster before the crowd, proclaiming the child Tully's future lord of the Riverlands, a proud father temporarily forgetting the war. Rosalind, recuperating in her chamber, heard the cheers from afar. Robb toasted their health, speaking of how this union of Tully and Frey blood overcame tragedy. The Great John led thunderous applause. Even Asha sat quietly at a side table, sipping mead, occasionally smirking at the exuberance around her. Catelyn, seated near Robb and Edmure, felt warmth in her soul she thought she might never feel again. The ghosts of Ned and the many lost lived with her still, but in this moment hope shone bright. The realm's threats lingered, yes? Sansa was lost, Arya unaccounted for, the Lannisters unbroken, the Iron Throne contested. But here, in this battered hall, new alliances formed from the ashes of old hatred. Perhaps that was how the realm healed, one child's cry at a time, one meal shared between old enemies, one vow to do better in the future. In the days after, Edmure and Rosalind lingered, letting the baby grow strong enough to travel. They planned to return eventually to Riverrun, but perhaps not until autumn. Rosalind wanted to ensure her health was stable, and Edmure relished the respite from the Riverland's tensions. Robb welcomed them for as long as they wished, hoping the presence of a newborn Tully might further solidify the bond. By midsummer, letters from the Vale trickled in, as if belatedly responding to Robb's earlier inquiries. This time, Lisa Arryn herself wrote a short, sharp note disclaiming any knowledge of Sansa Stark. She repeated that the Vale closed its gates to external meddling. The subtext was clear: do not come searching here. Beside it arrived another cryptic letter from Peter Baelish, dripping with politeness but containing no real substance. Robb read them and tossed them aside with frustration. They hide something, or they truly know nothing, he muttered. Either way, we can't force them. The Vale is too reclusive. More rumors arose from King's Landing, all contradictory. Some insisted that Tyrion Lannister had escaped to Pentos, that Cersei or the Tyrells tightened control. Others whispered that chaos reigned, with multiple factions jockeying for power behind Boy King Tommen. None mentioned Sansa, as though she had vanished from all public knowledge. The realm's swirling confusion stymied any direct approach. Catelyn consoled herself that no rumor of harm to Sansa circulated. Perhaps no news was good news. Meanwhile, life at Winterfell thrived so calmly that it felt almost surreal to those who had survived the earlier war. The southwestern walls complete, the Great Hall fully restored, farmland green with new crops, a lively population filling the keep. Such sights reminded older men of the days before Ned left for King's Landing. And yet, no day passed without the memory of how close the castle came to destruction under Theon and then Bolton. That memory kept them humble. Each night, watchmen still paced the ramparts, scanning the roads for potential foes. The realm might forget the North for a moment, but the North never forgot. As the harvest approached, wagons brought in the first gleanings of barley, turnips, and cabbages. The great barns near the castle swelled with produce. That bounty let Robb feed not just Winterfell but also send aid to smaller holdfasts that had barely survived the war. The Manderleys, Umbers, and Glovers did likewise in their regions, forging a sense of communal renewal. Indeed, one might say the North had never been so united under a single banner. A hush fell in mid-harvest, however, when news arrived from Castle Black that Stannis had advanced beyond the wall with a portion of his force, trying to subdue remaining wildlings. The Night's Watch worried that if Stannis ventured too far, he might stir something more dangerous. Another letter from Donnell Hill pleaded for more supplies or men. Robb convened a quick council, deciding to send another small shipment of grain and a handful of volunteers, aiming to keep the watch prepared. "I'd rather not see Stannis fail if the threat is real," Robb said bluntly. "Better a living Stannis at the wall than a horde of wildlings or others pouring south." So more wagons rolled out, accompanied by men proud to serve. The Great John complained, "We do so much for a man who calls himself king." But he did not hinder the effort. Ties of old custom bound the North to the watch, and rumors of unnatural threats dissuaded them from ignoring the pleas. In a short farewell speech, Robb told the volunteers that House Stark had always guarded the realm from the worst winter might bring, and they would not shirk that duty. The volunteers rode off to cheers, some giddy at the idea of seeing the legendary wall for themselves. All the while, Edmure's baby, little Hoster Tully, thrived under Rosalind's care. Catelyn found herself smiling whenever she saw the child's bright eyes, a living symbol that the tides of war did not wholly extinguish joy. Edmure, for his part, tried to discreetly gather northern support for a potential southern campaign. But the more he spoke to lords who had lost men to Frey treachery or Bolton's betrayal, the more he realized how reluctant they were to rejoin a broader conflict. "They'll stand with you if the Lannisters invade," Catelyn told him, "but they see no reason to go seeking out more bloodshed." One golden afternoon, Edmure took her aside in the godswood. The hot spring-fed pool shimmered, reflecting the face on the ancient weirwood. He paced restlessly, then turned to her. "Sister, the riverlands are precarious. If the North will not help us force the issue with King's Landing, we remain at risk." "I see Robb's caution, but is there truly no arrangement we can make?" Catelyn sighed. "We endured too many close calls. The North is exhausted. Robb cannot risk another war unless forced. My heart aches for your plight, but can you not hold Riverrun as we hold Winterfell? Strongly, until the realm's chaos calms." Edmure's shoulders slumped. "We can, for a time. I just hoped for a final blow to unseat the Lannisters. Perhaps that is my pride speaking." Catelyn touched his arm gently. "You have your wife and child to protect. War is not the only path to security. Build your alliances, keep your defenses strong. Wait for the Lannisters to devour themselves, or for Tyrell ambition to overshadow them. The realm is a swirling pit of alliances. As Robb says, it might unravel without us lifting a sword." He nodded, grudging acceptance. "You're right, of course. Still, I hate to leave Sansa and Arya's fate to chance. If we ever discover they languish in some Lannister dungeon, I'd ride tomorrow." His words struck a chord in Catelyn's chest. "I would ride with you," she whispered. "But until we have proof or a lead, we can only watch and wait." The old god's carved face gazed on them silently, as though underscoring the uncertainty of mortal hopes. Eventually, Edmure and Rosalind prepared to depart, baby Hoster in their arms. The harvest was nearing completion, and Riverrun needed its lord. They parted from Winterfell with heartfelt thanks, promising to remain in close contact. The Great John insisted on giving them a small escort as far as the neck. Rosalind parted from Catelyn with tears, promising she'd never forget the hospitality or the wondrous steam of Winterfell's godswood. Edmure embraced Robb, reaffirming the bond between Stark and Tully. Then, in a swirl of wagons and Mallister knights, they rode away into the mild autumn sun, leaving behind a lingering sense of kinship. Time rolled on, each day forging small moments of progress. The southwestern tower was repainted from top to bottom, freeing it of blackened stone. The Godswood's older paths, once littered with debris, were restored for quiet contemplation. The farmland near Winterfell, sown carefully in spring, now yielded a harvest abundant enough to fill storehouses. People marveled that a year after Bolton's siege, the castle could be so alive. Some credited Robb's wisdom, others claimed the old gods blessed them. Catelyn believed it was a mixture of both. Another sign of change arrived in a letter from White Harbor, rumors that Lord Wyman Manderley planned to build new ships, hoping to restore trade routes with Bravos or even Old Town. This implied that the North was no longer locked in isolation, that commerce might flow again. The letter also carried a note that the Manderleys would soon hold a feast to celebrate the end of the war. Robb dispatched a courtesy reply, pleased at any sign the North found its footing. Meanwhile, small caravans from White Harbor brought fish, salted or fresh, exchanging them for barley and furs. All these movements reminded the people that peace had tangible benefits. The North might flourish in trade as it once did in Ned Stark's time. A gentle sense of prosperity settled in. Catelyn walked the courtyard every morning, greeting tradesmen and farmers, offering motherly advice where she could. She recalled how she had arrived in this keep decades ago, a Tully bride uncertain if she could love the cold climate or the dire wolf banners. Over the years, Winterfell became her home as truly as Riverrun had been. Now it was a battered but unbowed bastion of hope. Occasionally, her thoughts drifted to Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon. That wound never fully healed. She lit candles in the godwood, praying that if they lived, they might sense the North's revival and find their way home. She prayed the realm's ever-churning chaos would not consume her children's last hope. In rare quiet moments, she recalled how Ned would stroke her hair, whispering that she was the strength that bound the family. She carried that memory as she oversaw the daily routines, forging a mother's presence for all the Northsfolk. Autumn eased onward, reddening the leaves in the wolfswood. The old rumor of a long winter's tale had proven somewhat false. Indeed, they were in the midst of a short and merciful respite. Nights grew cooler, but the harvest had been reaped, safely stowed in barns. If the realm worried about threats from the south, no sign of them approached. Letters from Harrenhal indicated that no Lannister host mustered near the Trident. The Vale remained silent behind its mountains. Castle Black occasionally wrote updates of Stannis' forays, but so far, no catastrophe. Even the Iron-born menace had evaporated under Euron's uncertain rule. Asha Greyjoy's presence at Winterfell likely contributed to that lull, as no Iron-born wanted to provoke the North again without a proper leader. The war that had once ravaged the continent felt oddly distant. Nevertheless, the Watchers stayed vigilant. The Great John took a pleasure in leading routine patrols of the roads, ensuring no bandits or stray Bolton men threatened travelers. He often came back grinning. "The land's as tame as a well-trained pup," he boasted. "We must keep it that way." The sense of an entire region recovering from trauma gave purpose to men who had known only battles. Freed from the necessity of fighting, they turned protectors, forging a new identity for the realm. Then, at last, an event arrived that tested the new normal in Winterfell, an envoy from King's Landing. One crisp afternoon, watchmen shouted that a column of riders with golden banners advanced along the King's Road, far smaller than an army but larger than a mere merchant band. Suspicion flared. Lannister gold was a hated sight in the north. Robb mobilized archers on the walls, instructing them to hold until the riders approached. As the envoy drew near, their lead rider raised a white flag. They called for parley, proclaiming themselves official messengers from King Tommen's court. The gate was opened under heavy guard. The courtyard bristled with swords. Catelyn stood beside Robb as the Lannister herald approached, flanked by a few crossbowmen. The herald, a slim man in fine cloak, dismounted and bowed with exaggerated courtesy. "In the name of Tommen of the House Baratheon, first of his name, King on the Iron Throne," he began in that ringing voice typical of Southern heralds, "I come to treat with Robb Stark, styling himself king in the north, and to convey an offer of peaceful negotiation for the realm's stability." Men muttered. The Great John looked ready to hurl an insult. Robb eyed the herald with stony composure. "You stand before the king in the north," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Speak your peace swiftly." The herald swallowed. "King Tommen desires to end the strife that once plagued these lands. He invites you to send an envoy to King's Landing, where terms might be discussed. Terms that could include the safe return of your sister Sansa Stark, if she is within the crown's power to deliver." He produced a scroll, holding it out. "Here is the royal letter, sealed by the hand of the king." Robb took the parchment, scanning the red wax seal. He did not break it yet. "So the crown suggests my sister might be found or ransomed back. Do they admit they hold her?" The herald hesitated. "The letter references rumors that Lady Sansa Stark fled the city or was abducted. The crown states no knowledge of her current location. However, if the realm's powers unite in negotiation, perhaps resources can be pooled to locate her swiftly." A low growl came from the Great John's throat. "Resources. They lie. They want you to come to King's Landing so they can do what Frey could not." Robb half nodded. "We know well how they keep oaths." He fixed the herald with a cold glare. "King's Landing has never shown courtesy to my father or to House Stark. Why should we trust an invitation now?" The herald tried to appear calm, though sweat beaded his brow. "The letter states that with Lord Tywin departed, the crown is reorganized under the guidance of the Queen Regent and the Tyrell Alliance. They see no profit in further war with the North. They wish to formalize the realm's unity, or at least a truce, guaranteeing your rightful governance of the North in exchange for recognizing King Tommen's rule in the South. The details can be hammered out, or so they claim." A hush followed. Lannister politics had changed if Tywin was G1, as rumors suggested. Maybe Cersei or the Tyrells truly wanted to avoid another front. Robb read the tension in his men's faces. Catelyn stood uneasy. A parley in King's Landing was the same city that executed Ned Stark. No Stark had left that place unscarred. Yet if the Southern monarchy was truly shifting, might it yield a real chance to free Sansa, wherever she was? Or was it a new trap more cunning than Frey or Bolton? After a long moment, Robb closed his hand around the sealed scroll. "Very well. We'll review your letter. You and your men will be housed outside the walls in tents provided by us. My stewards will see you fed. You may remain there until I send a reply. Touch no villager, break no law, or we will consider it an act of war." "Understood." The herald bowed low. "Yes, your grace. We come in peace." Robb gestured for them to be led away under guard. When they had gone, the courtyard erupted in murmurs. The Great John spat. A honeyed invitation. They want you kneeling, or your head on a spike like your father. I say we chase them back to the neck. Others were less certain. Ser Wendell Manderly noted that if Tywin truly was gone, maybe the crown sought a real settlement. The lords who had lost children in the war were split. Some wanted vengeance, others hungered for closure. Catelyn's mind spun with fear and longing. If there was even a fraction of sincerity in the claim that the crown might help find Sansa, how could they ignore it? That evening, in a tense meeting within the Solar, Robb gathered his closest advisors, including the Great John, Ser Wendell, Catelyn, and even Asha Greyjoy in the corner under guard. Her perspective on sly negotiations sometimes proved unexpectedly sharp. The sealed scroll was broken. Read aloud. It repeated what the herald said. The crown, under King Tommen and the Tyrell-led council, proposed a grand peace. The Iron Throne would not forcibly retake the North if Robb recognized them as the rightful monarchy in the South. In turn, they promised cooperation on the matter of missing nobles, including Sansa Stark. No direct guarantee, only an implication that if House Stark cooperated, they'd help track her. The letter ended with a formal invitation to attend a court session in King's Landing, naming Margaery Tyrell as Queen, Cersei as Queen Regent, and Garland Tyrell as the King's special counsel. The Great John slammed a fist on the table. Trickery. They want your oath. Then your blood. Enough. Let's be done with them. Ser Wendell rubbed his chin. If they truly confirm your dominion over the North in writing, we avoid more war. But do we trust them? Asha gave a sardonic laugh. Trust the Lannisters who murdered your father? Doubtful. But if they're fractured and the Tyrells run the show, maybe it's a different beast. The Tyrells have reason to keep the realm stable. War bleeds coin from their pockets. Robb tapped the scroll, face tight. They dangle Sansa like bait, yet the letter admits they have no certain knowledge of her whereabouts. Could it be they're simply using her name to coax me south? Catelyn spoke softly, heartbreak coloring her words. Perhaps. But if a faint chance exists that your presence in King's Landing might shake loose new leads on Sansa, how can we dismiss it? The realm grows weary of war. We can't charge in with an army, but maybe sending envoys to talk is a compromise. The Great John bristled. Envoys get imprisoned or killed. How many times have we seen that from the Lannisters? Catelyn recalled Ned's fate. Yes, they had reason for dread. She locked eyes with Robb, seeing the turmoil in him. They had come full circle from the earliest days of the war, grappling with whether to trust southern entreaties. The difference now was that the North was strong and independent. They could refuse and remain safe behind their borders. But that would do nothing for Sansa or for forging a final peace. Robb took a measured breath. We will not ride our entire host south, nor will I personally set foot in King's Landing without cast iron guarantees. But ignoring the letter outright might squander an opportunity. We might send a small envoy, half diplomatic, half spy, to glean the crown's sincerity. If they vanish or face foul play, we break off negotiations. If they find an opening to discover Sansa's fate, or at least a path to peace, we gain. The Great John rumbled disapproval, but others nodded. Ser Wendell offered to go, though he was just returned from the wall. Asha Greyjoy barked a short laugh. Send me to King's Landing? I'd cause a stir, that's certain. That suggestion was swiftly dismissed, though the odd notion lingered in the air. An ironborn envoy under Stark's banner might ironically slip through certain channels. But it was too outlandish, and many in the hall distrusted Asha that far. Eventually, it was decided that a carefully chosen party, fewer than a dozen men, would travel to King's Landing with no illusions about the risk. They would accept the crown's invitation to parley on neutral ground, possibly in some estate outside the city if the crown agreed. If they insisted on the city itself, the envoy would be on guard, never allowing themselves to be disarmed. They would not bring valuable hostages. The mission's sole aim was to gauge the truth behind the crown's offers. The Great John insisted that if any harm befell them, the entire North would close ranks, cutting off any chance of peace. So once more, war hovered in the balance. The Lannister herald was given a preliminary reply. House Stark would consider a diplomatic mission, but only under explicit terms guaranteeing safe conduct. The herald, presumably, would ride back to King's Landing with that message. The entire castle buzzed as watchers speculated whether the new Tyrell Lannister regime would accept such conditions. The realm's future might pivot on those answers. In quiet conversations, Robb confided to Catelyn that if the negotiations looked genuine, he might eventually journey south himself, but only after testing the water with a lesser envoy. He refused to risk his life or the North's pride on a whim. She agreed wholeheartedly, though anxiety chewed at her. Another excursion to King's Landing, memories of Ned's downfall loomed. But times had changed, and perhaps the Tyrells truly desired a settlement. Amid the swirl of possibility, daily life pressed on. Harvest concluded, storehouses packed with produce. Families who had taken refuge in Winterfell began returning to outlying villages, confident that no immediate threat prowled. The nights grew crisp, and talk of the next winter circulated among wise old men. Would it remain mild or bring a second wave of cold? None could say. The North was a land of cyclical extremes. House Stark braced for either outcome. In that calm, it would be easy to think the saga had reached a stable resolution. But each dawn reminded them that war's embers still smoldered. The Iron Throne beckoned for resolution, the Vale remained cryptic, Stannis lingered at the wall, the Ironborn lay quiet under Euron or scattered under no captain at all. The future was a tapestry of uncertain threads. Yet the people of Winterfell strode across the courtyard with heads held high, forging normalcy from chaos. Some days, Catelyn ascended the highest tower to watch the sunrise over green and brown farmland. She recalled how she had come here as a bride, her father's daughter, expecting a peaceful life. That dream ended when King Robert called Ned south. Now, after so many storms, she glimpsed a new dawn she had never dared imagine. The North restored, the war's fires cooled, the possibility of a real negotiation. She pressed a palm against the tower's cold stone, letting the wind ruffle her hair. "We hold on," she whispered, half prayer, half vow. For Ned, for our lost children, for the realm that might yet see peace. And so House Stark poised itself for another chapter, no longer facing immediate betrayal or siege, but the subtler challenge of diplomacy with the Lannisters and Tyrells. The battered fortress that had outlasted all assaults now served as a beacon of northern unity. Each sunrise, ravens soared from its rookery, carrying letters of possibility across Westeros. Each night, the hot springs murmured in the godwood as if the old gods kept a watchful eye on their resilient children. The Red Wedding had been reversed, the Boltons undone, the North made whole. What lay ahead might be gentler or might be another storm entirely, but House Stark was ready, winter-hardened and unbreakable, forging hope from every betrayal turned to dust. The great hall of Winterfell felt different these days. Gone were the half-collapsed walls and the constant fear that had haunted them after Theon Greyjoy's occupation and Roose Bolton's siege. In their place reigned a subdued prosperity. Servants scurried across new floor rushes, bearing pitchers of watered wine and platters of fresh bread from the autumn harvest. The hearth fires danced warmly against the stone walls, illuminating the twin banners of Stark and Tully that hung beside the high seat. Though not every scar could be painted over, dark beams still showed scorch marks from earlier destruction. Those marks were reminders of the fortress's survival, not evidence of present threat. One crisp morning, King Robb Stark stood with his back to the dais, gazing across the rows of tables that had once been battered by enemy swords. Grey Wind, his ever-faithful dire wolf, paced restlessly near his left leg, claws clicking on the floor. At the sight of the wolf, stewards kept a respectful distance. Conversations drifted in hushed tones around the hall. Men discussing road conditions, harvest tallies, occasional murmurs of the next steps in the realm's uncertain politics. Robb wore a simple brown doublet embroidered with the dire wolf sigil on the breast. He looked older than his years, lines of quiet resolve etched into his expression. Catelyn Stark stood at his side, absently smoothing a stray fold in her cloak. She had grown accustomed to seeing her son like this, no longer the spirited boy who raced through the godwood with a wooden sword, but a young king tempered by war's burdens. The swirl of events over the pasture weighed on her mind. Walder Frey's betrayal undone, Tywin Lannister's defeat, the Ironborn scattered, Roose Bolton dead, and the dread fort reclaimed, and now, a realm in flux as King's Landing ostensibly reached out to them in peace. On this day, a hush lay over the gathering. Robb had summoned his primary lords to finalize plans regarding the crown's overture. Most had gathered, the great John Umber, towering and broad in the shoulders, Ser Wendell Manderly, a thick-set man from White Harbor, a handful of Glover and Serwyn knights, and even the Ironborn woman Asha Greyjoy, still manacled but allowed partial freedom. Her presence, once shocking, had become oddly familiar. She conferred at times with Robb, gave practical counsel about possible sea routes, and seemed neither eager to fight nor to flee. As the appointed hour arrived, silence settled. Robb turned to face them, gray wind halting near his feet. In that moment, King and Dire Wolf looked like twin guardians of the North's future. "Lords, ladies," Robb began, voice echoing in the space that once reverberated with war cries. "The Crown's herald left Winterfell a fortnight ago bearing our conditions for a diplomatic mission. Yesterday, a raven arrived from King's Landing answering us." A faint rustle passed through the crowd. Most here already knew. They had read or at least heard rumors of the new letter. An invitation signed by the hand of the king, whoever that was now, to meet in neutral ground an hour's ride from King's Landing. But hearing it formally from Robb's mouth lent it weight. "The Crown," Robb continued, "proposes we send an envoy, no larger than 20 men, down the King's Road. Once near the city, they will host us in a manor called Rosby Hall, belonging to Lord Rosby, outside the main walls of King's Landing. They promise safe conduct and negotiate in King Tommen's name. In exchange, they ask we come unarmed beyond minimal guards and that we give assurance we won't attempt to remove or harm any courtly hostages." A note of bitterness tinged his tone, for the words reeked of Lannister paranoia. The Great John let out a low growl, crossing his arms. "So they want our party practically disarmed. And we're to trust them not to slit our throats in our sleep? Sounds like the seeds of another red wedding." Murmurs of agreement rose. Ser Wendell Manderly cleared his throat. "At least they offered Rosby Hall, not the Red Keep itself. That's better than stepping inside those cursed walls. But can we trust them?" Asha Greyjoy, leaning against a pillar with her shackled wrists, gave a short laugh. "No, you can't. But maybe that's not the point. The point is to see what advantage you can glean. Sometimes you sail into uncertain waters hoping the wind is in your favor." Catelyn glanced at Asha. The Iron-born woman had proven surprisingly astute at reading people's motivations. She had lived her life weaving through piracy, alliances, and betrayals. War had forced them all into the same game, one that tested cunning as much as steel. Robb studied the letter in his hand. This might be a chance to gather real information: who actually controls King's Landing, what alliances are shifting, and whether they truly have leads on Sansa. If they do, or if they can help us discover her whereabouts, we have cause to talk. His voice caught a moment on his sister's name, but he pressed on. "We can't remain ignorant forever, but we'll not walk blindly into another trap." He turned to the Great John, who stiffened, expecting a direct question. "John Umber, you've said from the first that we should spurn any negotiations with Lannisters. Do you still counsel that path?" The Great John exhaled, nostrils flaring. "I do. My heart says we owe them no courtesy. But my head sees the realm unsettled. We have enemies enough if the Crown is truly forging alliances. If you see an opening for peace or for Sansa's rescue, I won't gainsay you, my king. Just don't ride there in person and place your neck on the block." Robb's lips twitched in a faint smile. "We agree. I won't go personally, not yet. I'll send men I trust to sniff out truth from lies. Perhaps if they return safely with better terms, I might follow." Ser Wendell Manderly dipped his head. "Then name the envoys, your grace." "If you'll have me, I'll go." "I will have you," Robb said firmly. "You served well at the Wall, dealing with Stannis. You have a courteous tongue for delicate talks. Also, I'd have a few other seasoned men, 1 or 2 Umbers, a Glover, maybe a Serwyn. Each house can represent the North's unity, but the group remains small." The Great John rumbled, grudging acceptance. I'll send my nephew. He's young but brave, and he's lived in the South once. That might help. But if your men vanish, then we know the Crown means treachery," Robb finished. "And we cut them off entirely, readied for war again." Catelyn stepped forward, clearing her throat. "And Sansa, if they truly have no knowledge of her, do we gain anything by parley?" A hush fell. That was the question haunting them all. If the Crown was as ignorant as they claimed, what could the North truly obtain? Possibly a formal recognition of Stark rule and end to any southern attempts to retake the North, more stable trade relations. But also the faint hope that in the swirl of King's Landing's politics, someone might know Sansa's fate. Robb's face softened at his mother's words. "We try. Even if they do not hold her, they might have leads on Peter Baelish or others who might. I can't ignore the possibility that open channels of negotiation might yield clues." Slowly, the assembly nodded. War weariness had seeped into the bones of every Northman who survived. They'd fight if pressed, but none yearned to march an army south unless absolutely necessary. If a small envoy might open the path to a stable separation from the Iron Throne and a chance, however slim, to find Sansa, then it was worth the risk. They spent the next hour hashing out details. Each man chosen for the mission would have a horse, a sword, and no more than a dagger. No heavy armor, no war banners proclaiming aggression. They would ride under the dire wolf sigil, but in lesser numbers to show they came peacefully. The crown's letter insisted on no more than 20 in total. Robb decided to send exactly that many, a show of strength but within the limit. They carry sealed letters reaffirming House Stark's stance. The North was free, the king would not kneel, but we will talk if you prove honorable. Let the Lannisters see we do not quake, but nor do we seek fresh blood, Robb said. Grey Wind let out a quiet rumble as if endorsing the logic. Catelyn sipped from a cup of watered wine brought by a steward. And who leads them? Ser Wendell, you volunteered. Should we also send Lord Glover? A middle-aged Glover knight named Harwin Glover bowed. I'll go in Lord Galbart's stead. Lord Galbart remains in Deepwood Motte, overseeing repairs. But I've experience in King's Landing from years ago. I'll serve. So it was settled. Ser Wendell Mandoley, Harwin Glover, a nephew of the great John named for Rick Umber, a pair of Serwyn men, and others to fill out the retinue. They'd depart in a week's time, once supplies were gathered and final letters drafted. The North would watch anxiously. Shortly after the meeting, as men filtered out of the hall, Asha Greyjoy lingered, eyeing the swirling crowd. Robb noticed her hesitation and paused. Something on your mind, Captain Greyjoy? She shrugged, the chains on her wrists clinking. You could let me sail south and do your bidding. I know King's Landing from a raid or two in the past. She offered a half-smile. Though it's probably unwise to place me among Lannisters. They might remember old Ironborn raids. Catelyn stepped close enough to watch her face. We appreciate the offer, but will not risk sending an Ironborn prisoner as our envoy. That could be misunderstood. Asha smirked. I thought as much. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. She turned, allowing the guard to guide her out. That evening, Robb, Catelyn, and the Great John discussed the final form of a letter for the crown. By lamplight, the solar glowed with a sense of pensive calm. Outside, the yard was dark, the moon a crescent overhead. Catelyn helped phrase certain lines, ensuring they struck a balance of courtesy and guardedness. Emphasize that we remain loyal to the memory of our father, Eddard Stark, once named Warden of the North, and that we consider the North a sovereign realm unless a fair treaty is offered, Robb said. The Great John nodded, though he disliked too much diplomatic flourish. Make sure to mention that if the envoy is harmed, the entire North will rise in wrath. Catelyn's quill scratched as she wrote. Yes, let me set that down carefully. Threatening them outright might be seen as savage, but a reminder of the consequences is wise. By midnight, they had a final draft. The Great John left in search of his bed, grumbling about fancy words. Robb rubbed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. Grey Wind dozed on the rug. Catelyn set down the quill, flexing her stiff fingers. That's done then, she said softly. May the gods keep them safe. Robb exhaled a long breath, weariness in his gaze. I can't shake the memory of father riding south under a banner of friendship, only to die. This time I won't be the one who goes. If the crown proves false, they'll kill our envoys. But at least the realm won't lose its king. Catelyn's heart ached at the mention of Ned. She placed a comforting hand over Robb's. I know. We can only proceed with caution. Better we attempt some measure of negotiation than bury ourselves in ignorance while the realm shifts around us. He nodded. Yes, we must. Thank you, Mother. I wouldn't have lasted this war without your counsel. She squeezed his hand gently, blinking back the threat of tears. Ned's absence weighed on them both, but as each day passed, it was clearer that Robb carried his father's spirit forward. You're doing what must be done. House Stark will endure. Soon they parted ways. Catelyn walked the dim corridors, footfalls echoing on stone. Memories swarmed her. A younger Sansa spinning in a new gown, Arya chasing cats, Bran climbing walls, Rickon clinging to her skirts, all scattered or lost. She paused to collect herself, leaning against a torchlit arch. The realm might never be wholly at peace, but if this parley offered a single lead on Sansa's fate, it would be worth any risk. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer to the old gods that the envoys would find truth instead of betrayal. A week later, the courtyard bustled with departure. Horses neighed, stamping on the hard-packed earth. The retinue of 20 men, led by Ser Wendell Manderly and Harwin Glover, stood in half armor. The Greatjon's nephew, for Rick Umber, grinned nervously, wearing a proud tabard emblazoned with the roaring giant of House Umber alongside the stark direwolf on his cloak's clasp. Each man bore a sword or a short spear, a dagger at the belt. No heavy war gear to honor the crown's terms. Baggage mules carried bedrolls, supplies, and sealed letters. Robb, accompanied by the Greatjon and Catelyn, supervised final checks. A small crowd of Winterfell folk watched from the sidelines, curious or anxious. The travelers conferred with the castle maester for last-minute instructions on contacting ravens. If the crown provided no direct harm, the envoys planned to remain near King's Landing for as long as negotiations took. If trouble arose, they would dispatch immediate ravens to Winterfell. Catelyn noticed how young some of these men were, especially for Rick Umber and a Serwyn lad called Louis, who had only seen 15 name days. War's cruelty forced boys into manhood swiftly. Yet here they were, braving an uncertain mission. She moved among them, offering motherly words of caution, trust no Lannister promise at face value. If they lead you somewhere alone, be on your guard. Sleep in shifts. Write frequently. They nodded dutifully, though their eyes flickered with the spark of adventure. Perhaps part of them was excited to see the fabled capital with its great walls and towers. She prayed their naive wonder wouldn't cost them dearly. Ser Wendell Manderly, more seasoned, approached Robb one last time. Your Grace, I vow to speak with courtesy but hold firm. We yield no oath of fealty, but will gauge their sincerity. If they truly want peace, we'll bring home better tidings. Robb clasped his wrist. I trust you, Ser Wendell. Remember, the priority is to confirm their intentions. If all is well, see what they know of Sansa. If they show any sign of duplicity, return home swiftly. Understood. Ser Wendell bowed, then offered a respectful nod to Catelyn. The Greatjon strode forward with a parting growl. Remember, lad, if they feed you fine wine, it might be drugged. Keep your senses. A short burst of laughter rippled among the men, but the caution was not lost. Finally, with all in readiness, Robb moved to address them in a clear, carrying voice. You ride south under the direwolf banner, carrying the goodwill of the north. May the gods watch over you. Show them we are not savages, but nor are we fools. If the crown desires genuine peace, let them prove it by sparing you any harm. He lifted a hand. The party mounted in unison, reining in their horses. Grey Wind stood at Robb's side, silent and watchful. A stable boy opened the main gate. Outside, the field stretched with early autumn color, golden grasses rippling in a breeze. Within minutes, the retinue trotted out, escorted for a few leagues by a handful of Winterfell outriders who would see them safely along the first leg of the King's Road. Catelyn stood with Robb on the ramparts, watching the column shrink into the distance. She recognized the same swirling dread she'd felt when Ned left for King's Landing years ago. Could history repeat itself? She silently prayed not. After a long pause, Robb exhaled. We wait now. She set a hand on his forearm. Wait and hope. They returned inside. Winterfell resumed its daily hum, farmland visits, stonemason duties, small courts of law. But tension hovered. Everyone knew their best men had ventured into the lion's den, albeit a smaller den outside the city walls, if rumor could be trusted. Time would decide if this gamble bore fruit or unleashed old horrors anew. Days blurred into weeks with no immediate raven from the envoy. The last that arrived came from Moat Caelin's watchers, confirming the party had passed safely, heading south. Then nothing, just silence. Some nights, Catelyn dreamed of crossbow bolts raining down on unsuspecting northerners, a flash reminiscent of the near-Red wedding. She awoke each time, heart-pounding, silently cursing the realm's capacity for deceit. Robb stayed outwardly calm, focusing on Winterfell's governance. He reorganized supply lines to outlying holdfasts, preparing them for the coming winter. He held short audiences in the Great Hall, settling land disputes or hearing requests from lesser lords. The Greatjon frequently took small patrols across the northern roads, ensuring no new bandit gangs emerged. Asha Greyjoy roamed the yard, chafing at captivity but never pushing so far as to provoke punishment. She sometimes lingered near the gates, watching caravans depart as if yearning for the sea. But she said little about it. One rainy evening, a traveling bard arrived from White Harbor, bringing a small trove of fresh gossip. He sang of rumored wedding plans in King's Landing. Some said Tommen might be betrothed again, or that Marjorie Tyrell's family pulled strings behind the throne. The bard claimed he had heard mention of the missing Stark girl, whispered in taverns, though no one knew her whereabouts. Some insisted she was hidden by the Tyrells, others said she fled with the imp, Tyrion Lannister, to the Free Cities. None of it was verifiable. Catelyn listened with her heart in her throat. The bard's words felt like old specters, Sansa's name dragged through rumor, teased out in half-lies. She could do nothing but hold her composure. If the envoy succeeded, they'd learn more. If not, by mid-autumn, leaves turned copper in the wolfswood, falling in clusters across the streams. Winterfell's fields were now stubble after the harvest. Smoke from the chimneys lent a cozy haze to the yard. Yet beneath that warmth lay tension. The envoy had been gone nearly a moon's turn. Still no raven arrived. Was that good or ill? Late one dusk, as Catelyn walked the upper ramparts with Robb, Grey Wind patrolling behind them, a horn sounded below, one blast from the watchtower. That signaled a rider or travelers approaching. She leaned over the parapet, seeing torches bobbing near the main gate. The watchers shouted something lost in the swirl of wind. They descended quickly, reaching the courtyard as the gate swung open. A single man entered on a lathered horse, a familiar sight, Ferric Umber, the Greatjon's nephew, dust-caked and gasping. The courtyard erupted in commotion. Robb and Catelyn pushed forward, the Greatjon on their heels. Ferric tumbled off the saddle, barely steady on his feet. Guards rushed to help. "Where's the rest of the envoy?" Robb demanded, voice taut. Ferric caught his breath, eyes wide with fear or exhaustion. "Coming behind me, a day or two behind. They're safe. I rode ahead with urgent tidings to prepare you." "A hush." Robb steadied him by the shoulders. "Speak." Ferric swallowed. "We made it to Rosby Hall as planned. The Crown's men received us politely. There were Lannister guards, but also many Tyrell men. Ser Wendell and Harwin Glover met with, not Queen Cersei, but Ser Garland Tyrell and a few Crown officials. They talked about a possible peace. We believe they were sincere about not wanting war in the north. They offered trade pacts and recognized you as king in the north, so long as we recognized King Tommen as rightful monarch south of the neck." Gasp spread. That was akin to a formal partition of the realm, unheard of since the days of the ancient kings. "Did they mention Sansa?" Catelyn asked in a trembling voice. Ferric nodded. "They claim no certain knowledge. But Ser Garland Tyrell said they suspect Peter Baelish spirited her away. The official line is that the Crown wants to locate her. They think Baelish might have taken her to the Vale, though they aren't sure." The Greatjon muttered an oath. Robb pressed on. "So the Crown concedes the North is free? Just like that?" Ferric shook his head. "There's more. They want an alliance. They suggest a formal treaty. The North remains independent, but we sign a non-aggression pact, maybe some marriage ties in the future. Something to cement it. Also, they want the North to pledge not to harbor any pretenders who might threaten Tommen's throne from northern soil. In short, a guarantee that we won't support another Baratheon or Targaryen. They also ask that we share trade routes, let them come north to buy furs, timber, all that." Men exchanged astonished looks. The concept of a bisection of Westeros into a northern kingdom and a southern monarchy might upend centuries of history. "What of King Tommen's regents?" Robb asked. "Cersei? Margaery Tyrell?" Ferric rubbed his face, sweat trailing down his temple. "We saw no sign of Queen Cersei or Margaery, only Garland Tyrell, some Lannister knights, and Lord Rosby. They said the Queen Mother was ill or too busy to travel. Margaery was likewise absent. Ser Garland insisted they had no desire to repeat old crimes. He spoke kindly of your father, said the realm needed healing. Seemed genuine to me, but I'm no cunning judge." Robb's gaze flickered with intense thought. "And how did you part from them?" Ser Wendell and Harwin Glover remained behind, continuing talks. They planned to finalize a draft treaty. They insisted one of us come north to inform you. I volunteered to ride fast. I left them safe, well treated. They said you might soon be invited to sign in person or send a senior representative. They gave no sign of treachery. A hush followed. The Greatjon let out a slow exhale. If it's real, the war might truly end, at least the part with the Lannisters. Then you'd be recognized as king with your own domain. Catelyn's thoughts whirled. How many thousands of lives had been lost because the Lannisters wouldn't let the North secede, because they had executed Ned for treason, because Walder Frey colluded with them at the Red Wedding that almost was. And now possibly they wanted peace? The realm's chaos must be worse than they realized. Or the Tyrells genuinely sought to prevent further fracturing. She steadied herself and asked the next crucial question. And Sansa, they truly only suspect Baelish took her to the Vale? Ferric nodded. Ser Garland implied they suspect it strongly. He said Baelish has done odd dealings with Lisa Arryn that maybe Sansa's betrothed to someone in the Vale. They want to find her to avoid charges that the crown let a highborn hostage vanish. But they have no direct hold on Baelish. He's cunning, they said. Rob's jaw tightened. So if this is true, Sansa might indeed be in the Vale. Or at least under Baelish's sway. Catelyn felt a flash of dread. Peter Baelish, a man cunning enough to manipulate half the capital, once allied with Lisa Arryn in secret. Could he have orchestrated Sansa's disappearance as some twisted ploy for power? Ned had once warned her that Peter was not to be trusted. The notion that Sansa might be at his mercy stung worse than any blade. All right, Rob said at last, exhaling. Frey, you did well. You'll rest. Then we must decide how to respond. If Ser Garland Tyrell is earnest in forging peace, I might be obliged to answer. Let us see how the realm might unify or at least stand down. Men began dispersing, some rushing to spread the news. Frey was led away by a steward, swaying with exhaustion. The Great John stomped off, muttering about the wonder of a Lannister entreaty that might mean no more war. Catelyn, left with Rob in the courtyard, gazed at him anxiously. He turned to her. Mother, what do you think? She drew a trembling breath. It's more than we could have hoped for, but we must remain wary. The Tyrells might be genuine, or they might be stalling until the crown reasserts itself. As for Sansa, if she's truly in the Vale, perhaps we can approach Lisa with new leverage. Or approach Baelish directly, though that's a snake's nest. Rob nodded gravely. We might need to weigh a second envoy, perhaps I go in person, or send someone with enough rank to finalize a treaty. If the crown truly acknowledges our sovereignty, that's the victory Father dreamed of. But can we trust them after all the blood spilled? She rested a hand on his shoulder. I cannot answer that. But as we always have, we proceed carefully. He inclined his head, an echo of Ned's old gesture. Yes, carefully. Within 2 days, the entire castle buzzed with the news that the crown recognized the possibility of a Stark-ruled North. Some older men recalled the age of the kings before Aegon's conquest. They marveled that it might be returning. The younger generation saw it as a testament to King Rob's triumph. Every foe in the north beaten, and the south giving them recognition. Whether out of war weariness or a genuine desire for healing, it still felt momentous. The Great John scowled about Lannister gold, but openly admitted that no realm could fight forever. He told Catelyn one evening, if they truly yield the north to us, I'll toast them. Then keep my eyes open for the next betrayal. She could only agree. Rob consulted with his key advisors about a possible second mission to finalize matters. Should he go personally? The Great John opposed it, reminding everyone how Ned's personal presence in King's Landing ended in tragedy. Ser Wendell Manderly had not yet returned, and they needed someone with equal rank. Perhaps Lord Galbart Glover or the Great John himself, or a combination of High Lords. But the Great John refused to risk his life in the south. Catelyn recalled how uneasy she felt letting Ned go alone. She said softly to Rob, "You are king. If you go, you risk the North's entire cause. But if you don't, they might see it as an insult." He mulled it over, eventually deciding on a compromise. He would not go all the way to King's Landing but might travel as far as Rosby Hall, meeting them on neutral ground. Let them see the king in the north stands firm outside their city gates. If they agreed to sign a formal treaty there, it might serve. My presence might show I'm serious, Rob said. But I'll bring enough swords to keep me safe, or retreat if needed. The Great John grudgingly accepted this plan. They fixed the time for after Samhain, a harvest festival that was due in a fortnight. That would let them gather a suitable escort. If, in the meantime, Ser Wendell or Harwin Glover returned with more details, they could adjust. The Samhain festival arrived, a tradition in the north marking the end of harvest and the approach of winter's dark nights. Despite everything, Winterfell soared with color and music. Villagers thronged inside the gates to share in the feast. Long tables lined the courtyard under lanterns, a mild evening for autumn. Children ran about in masks shaped like wolves or crows, shrieking in playful fright. It was the largest gathering since the war's earliest days. Even Asha Greyjoy, allowed partial freedom under watch, observed from the sidelines with quiet fascination. Catelyn wore a dark blue cloak trimmed with fur. Rob, in a simpler cloak pinned by a dire wolf clasp, strolled among the revelers, greeting them as a kind of father-lord figure. Grey wind prowled at his side, occasionally startling children who giggled and dared each other to approach. The Great John presided over an archery contest. The entire castle radiated a warmth that defied the ghosts of war. At dusk, torches flared, and a hush fell. Robb and Catelyn took seats on a raised dais near the main courtyard steps. The Great John led a moment of silence for the many dead Ned Stark, the men lost at Harrenhal, the battles of the Twins, Riverrun, Moat Cailin, Winterfell, and the Dreadfort. Then the crowd erupted in somber applause, followed by a toast to the living. Catelyn felt tears threatening her composure. She remembered how a year prior, this same courtyard was a battlefield of Bolton's making. Now children danced on the same cobblestones. War's shadow lingered, but so did life. As the feast wore on, men consumed roasted fowls, boiled turnips, barley bread, and beer from White Harbor's casks. Conversation roamed from jokes about the next harvest to whispered speculation about the southern negotiations. Some asked if the realm might truly see two crowns, one for the north, one for the south. Others wondered if all this talk was a cunning Lannister snare. They drank to quell the doubts. A hush befell them when, unexpectedly, distant horns sounded from the ramparts. 2 short blasts that signaled approaching riders under a friendly banner, not enemies. The crowd stirred, uncertain. Even at a festival, the watchers stayed vigilant. Robb exchanged glances with Catelyn, then rose, gray wind trotting close. The Great John beckoned a handful of guards. People parted as the king led them across the courtyard, up the steps to the outer gate. Torches flared overhead. From the parapets came a shout. They bear the direwolf banner and the Manderly Merman. Ser Wendell returns. Relief shot through the watchers. They opened the gate. In rode Ser Wendell Manderly, accompanied by Harwin Glover and 8 others from the original envoy. The courtyard erupted in cheers as the travelers dismounted. Each looked dusty, faces lined with fatigue, but they wore expressions of subdued triumph. The festival crowd pressed in, anxious to hear news. Ser Wendell slipped off his horse, wincing as he stretched stiff muscles. He bowed to Robb. "Your Grace, forgive my intrusion on your festival. We made haste to bring joyous tidings." The crowd hushed, hearts pounding. "Speak, Ser Wendell," Robb said, a flicker of hope bright in his eyes. Ser Wendell took a breath, glancing at Harwin Glover for confirmation, who nodded. "We have concluded a formal draft treaty with the Crown's delegates at Rosby Hall. They recognized you as king in the north, free from southern rule, on condition that you disclaim any claim to the Iron Throne or alliance with other pretenders. In exchange, the North commits to no aggression or infiltration south, fosters open trade, and remains neutral if the Crown wars with others. The realm effectively splits at the neck. Tommen rules south, you rule north. It's a done deal if you sign." A ripple of astonishment swept the courtyard. For the first time in centuries, the North might truly stand as an independent kingdom recognized by the Iron Throne. Cheers erupted, men pounding each other on the back, women hugging children. Some hardly believed it. Robb stood stunned a moment, then asked, "And your negotiations with Ser Garland Tyrell were Hey, honest? No sign of treachery?" Harwin Glover stepped forward. "None. We were well treated. They gave us lodging, ample food, and courtesy. They repeated that Tywin Lannister's death and the fiasco after Joffrey's murder left the crown eager to end pointless wars. The Tyrells apparently push for stability. They see no advantage in forcing the North to bend. They'd rather have peace and a guaranteed friendly border." The Great John let out a hoarse laugh, half in disbelief. "They want no part of us now that we've proven we won't die easily. I'll take that as a compliment." Men roared approval. Robb lifted a hand for calm. "And Sansa?" Silence fell. Ser Wendell's face grew pained. "They stand by the claim that they do not hold her. They suspect Baelish. Indeed, they produced old records indicating Sansa vanished from King's Landing around the time of Joffrey's wedding, last seen fleeing the castle. Some rumors say she's in the Vale, wed to some new lord. No one will confirm. The Crown offered to help locate her if we sign the peace, but they can't promise success." A lump formed in Catelyn's throat. So no new confirmation, only the same suspicion about Baelish. She swallowed her disappointment. Robb exhaled softly. "We must handle that ourselves then." But if this treaty stands, at least we have no southern armies blocking our search. Good. A roar of excitement built in the courtyard. The Greyjoy brandished a tankard, bellowing, "Long live the king in the north." People echoed the cry, voices mingling with the crackle of torches. The harvest festival now had a second reason to rejoice, the prospect of recognized independence. Catelyn blinked away tears. They had bled so much to reach this day, losing Ned, nearly losing the entire line. If the gods allowed, perhaps House Stark would see a new golden age. Robb beckoned Ser Wendell and Harwin aside, leading them to a quieter corner near the keep's door. Catelyn and the Greyjoy followed, along with a few other key lords. Firelight glimmered on their faces as they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "Tell me more about this treaty," Robb said. "Is it written? Did you sign anything, or must I do it personally?" Harwin Glover tapped a leather satchel slung at his side. "We carry the official parchments. They await your seal. We added ours only as witnesses, not concluding the final step. They want you to come to Rosby Hall or send a designated lord with your signet ring to finalize it in presence of crown delegates." The Greyjoy's brow furrowed. "Rosby Hall again? That close to King's Landing? Are they certain they want your presence so near their city? Could be a trap." Ser Wendell shook his head. "We saw no sign of duplicity last time. If they intend to snare Robb, they had the chance with us, but they kept everything cordial. Still, caution is wise. They insisted it's part of the ceremony, so the realm sees the agreement as valid." Robb glanced at his mother, then back to the men. "And if I choose to send a High Lord in my stead?" Harwin Glover pursed his lips. "They strongly prefer your presence, your grace. But they might accept a recognized proxy, maybe the Greyjoy or a lord of equal standing, if you absolutely refuse. However, Ser Garland said it would show goodwill if you came. He promised that the crown would stand by guest right." "Guest right," the Greyjoy scoffed. "We saw how Walder Frey spat on that." "Walder Frey was undone by it," Catelyn reminded him quietly. "The Tyrells might be more earnest." Robb turned to her. She read the uncertainty in his eyes, recalling how Ned's personal journey to King's Landing ended in betrayal. But the situation had changed. The North was no longer fractured or threatened from within. The crown was no longer purely under Lannister control, with Tywin looming. If the Tyrells wanted peace, they had the manpower to enforce a safe parley. He inhaled. "I said before I might go if terms look genuine. They do. Let me think carefully. If I ride to Rosby, I'll bring a strong escort, 50 knights at least. Enough to fight off a sudden betrayal or to retreat if the city tries to cut us off." The Greyjoy rumbled. "I'll lead that escort by your side. I'll not let you vanish in a southern trap." Robb managed a thin smile. "I appreciate it. Let's set the wheels in motion. We'll not rush. We'll make preparations and depart in a few weeks or a moon's turn. Enough time to finalize things here." Ser Wendell bowed. "We can rest, then guide you back. I suspect the crown's delegates wait at Rosby. They seemed eager for swift resolution." Robb nodded. "They can wait. The North is not at their beck and call." So the seeds were planted for an unprecedented journey, the king in the North traveling near King's Landing, not as a captive but as a recognized sovereign. The rumor spread through Winterfell like wildfire. Men gaped at the notion that the Lannisters, who had once demanded all kneel, now sundered the Seven Kingdoms. Others whispered suspicion. But overall, hope flared bright. Perhaps the war's cost had finally forced the crown to relent. The next day, under a pale dawn sky, Robb summoned his mother, the Greyjoy, and a small circle of advisors to the solar. The shutters were flung open, letting crisp airflow in. Asha Greyjoy, summoned out of curiosity, arrived under guard, arms still bound. Grey wind prowled near the door, tail sweeping dust from the floor. Robb unrolled the draft treaty on the table. Bold script spelled out the terms: recognition of Robb Stark, king in the north, and his successors holding sovereignty over all lands north of the Neck in exchange for the North's neutrality in southern conflicts. Non-interference with the crown's rightful domain and open trade. An additional clause promised cooperation to locate Lady Sansa Stark or any other missing Stark. Catelyn's heart squeezed at the mention. At least the crown officially recognized the injustice of her disappearance. He pointed to a line near the bottom. They proposed an official marriage tie to ensure future amity, a younger Tyrell or Lannister cousin wedding a Stark cousin. Something to link our houses. Not demanded outright, but strongly suggested. The Greyjoy barked laughter. Marry a Tyrell? Or a Lannister? The realm's seen enough forced betrothals. But maybe in years to come if it cements peace. Catelyn recalled Sansa's forced betrothal to Joffrey, a fiasco drenched in heartbreak. She prayed that no new Stark would endure such a nightmare. We can leave the clause indefinite. No immediate arrangement. If the next generation chooses to wed, so be it. Robb nodded in agreement. Yes, we'll not sign away our kin. That must remain optional. Asha Greyjoy leaned forward, scanning the parchment with surprising interest. 2 kingdoms in one realm. Fascinating. The Iron Islands once dreamed of independence too, but never achieved it. If you succeed, you might inspire breakaway movements everywhere. Her remark reminded Catelyn of the precarious nature of big changes. The crown might be making a choice to prevent bigger fractures. If the Vale or Dorne tried to secede next, the Iron Throne might regret letting the North go. But that was not House Stark's concern. Robb tapped a final line. They want me to vow never to shelter exiled enemies of the crown, like Stannis if he flees the wall, or a Targaryen if one emerges. In truth, that's no burden. We have no interest in championing them. Let them fight in the south if they wish. After thorough discussion, they agreed the treaty was mostly acceptable. Some phrases needed clarifying, particularly around free travel across each other's lands. They also insisted that the crown disclaim any right to tax northern trade. That would be key. The north refused to pay coin south. Robb then looked around. We'll finalize a short list of revisions. Then, in a fortnight or so, I ride with an escort to meet the crown's delegates at Rosby. I guess Garland Tyrell or Lord Rosby again. We'll sign. If all goes well, we come home triumphant. If not, we escape or fight. A hush. The great John hammered a fist lightly on the table. We'll not fail you, my king. 50 or more men, well-armed, plus your skill. They won't catch us unawares. Asha smirked. Might be quite a spectacle. A northern king near the capital not bowing. If they try some sly ruse, you'll see the real measure of their intentions. Robb gave a curt nod. Yes. Meanwhile, we must keep the realm stable in my absence. Great John, you'll remain as Castellan of Winterfell while I'm away, or at least joint with my mother if she chooses to stay. Let's confirm duties. At that, the Great John frowned. If you're leading an escort, I'd come too. You'll need me if trouble arises. Robb considered. I do value your presence, but someone must hold Winterfell, and I trust you as much as my mother. We can't strip the castle of strong leadership. Alternatively, Mother could hold it alone. Catelyn weighed the choice. Her heart rebelled at letting Robb go south again, but she also recognized that her presence might reassure him. However, if she left and something happened at Winterfell, she pressed her lips. I am torn, Robb. I lost your father to those southern vipers. I can't bear the thought of losing you. Yet if I join you, I might help gauge their sincerity. I've known some of them, Cersei at least. My presence might also quell fears that the North hides a new war. But Winterfell needs a calm hand in your absence. He exhaled. Mother, I'll not force you. If you stay, the Great John can ride with me. If you come, he remains. Either combination is fine. But I do sense your counsel might help. Let me know your decision in a few days. A hush lingered. She nodded, heart squeezed in old trauma. Finally, the meeting adjourned. Robb summoned the scribes to draft final letters. The Great John stomped away to ready men. Asha Greyjoy stepped aside quietly, the guard escorting her out. Catelyn and Robb emerged into the corridor, exhaustion tugging them. He turned to her with a rueful smile. I never imagined being an independent king would involve so many words and parchments, not steel alone. She returned the smile, though shadows flickered in her eyes. Words can be sharper than steel if wielded by cunning tongues. Our father discovered that in King's Landing. His voice softened. Yes, but maybe this time we control the blade. Over the next fortnight, final details consumed Winterfell. The scribes polished the North's official demands. A small force was selected to form Robb's personal guard for the southern trip. The Grey John insisted on at least 60 men, trained cavalry. Robb compromised at 40. That left enough behind to defend Winterfell. Farmers from outlying villages donated some fresh produce for the journey, half in pride that their king traveled in style, half in worry about what could happen. Catelyn wrestled with her decision. She spent nights pacing her chamber, haunted by visions of Ned's capture. Yet part of her believed she could protect Robb from pitfalls if she were present. She remembered how Ned struggled with Cersei's manipulations. Perhaps, having learned from that tragedy, she might sense new traps. In the end, she resolved to go with him. If adversity struck, she'd face it at his side. She told the Great John, who accepted the role of Castellan in her stead, albeit with some reluctance. So it was settled. Mother and son would journey together to Rosby Hall. The rest of House Stark's leadership, like the Grey John, plus many smaller lords, remained behind, preserving Winterfell's authority. As the day of departure dawned, the castle rose early. Men bustled about loading wagons, saddling horses. Grey wind prowled the yard, unnerving a few mules. The Grey John strode among the departing ranks, double-checking gear. A hush of tension undercut the busyness. Everyone recalled the dire outcome of Ned's own southern expedition. But now the North was in a position of strength, not subjugation. Robb emerged from the keep in half-armor, a fur-lined cloak pinned by a wolf-shed clasp. Catelyn followed in a thick traveling cloak, face resolved. The men bowed as the king approached. Grey wind trotted at his side, ears pricked. The sky overhead shone with crisp autumn light, promising mild weather for the journey. A small crowd of townsfolk had gathered to see them off, among them Asha Greyjoy, still manacled, though the Grey John had permitted her to watch. She lingered behind two guards near the main steps, arms folded. As Robb and Catelyn passed, she gave a short nod. "Good luck, Stark. Try not to lose your head on a southern chopping block." Robb half-smiled. "I appreciate the sentiment. Perhaps you'll see us return triumphant." Asha's eyes glinted. "If you do, maybe then you'll let me sail free. If not, well, I'll find a way." He said nothing, moving on. Catelyn felt a pang of odd sympathy for the Iron-born woman. Asha's entire life was in limbo, reliant on House Stark's mercy. If the new peace endured, perhaps they could safely release her. War captivity had become an afterthought in the shifting realm. The cavalry lined up, about 40 men plus 2 supply wagons. Among them were seasoned knights from various northern houses, 4 Serwyn riders, 3 men from House Glover, a pair from House Tallheart, a cluster of Manderleys, and some loyal Stark men who had survived multiple battles. Each wore simpler harnesses, not full plate, to keep the expedition nimble. They carried short spears, swords, and shields bearing the direwolf. The plan was to ride at a moderate pace, gather at Moat Cailin with a small reinforcement from the Reeds, then proceed south to the Rosby estate near King's Landing. The Grey John approached. "My king," he boomed, "take care. You carry all our hopes. If the crown deals fairly, we'll have peace at last. If not, the North stands ready to avenge you." Robb clasped his arm. "I know, friend. Keep Winterfell safe. With you here, I have no doubts." They exchanged a firm embrace. Catelyn stepped forward, receiving a parting nod from the Grey John. He tried to hide the worry in his eyes. "My lady," returned quickly. "Winterfell isn't the same without you." She pressed his hand in thanks. Then, Robb signaled, and the party mounted. Grey wind leapt up to pad beside Robb's horse. The gates opened wide, and the watchers at the ramparts raised horns for a short salute. Townsfolk cheered, though it was a subdued cheer, colored by uncertainty. Thus they set forth, King Robb Stark at the head, Catelyn riding near him, followed by knights and wagons. The wide dirt road leading from Winterfell spanned farmland tinted gold and auburn under the autumn sky. As they rode, she cast a final glance back at the castle's towers, once blackened, now alive with banners. A hush of gratitude filled her. However this journey ended, Winterfell endured. They traveled in disciplined lines, passing small villages. People emerged to wave, some kneeling to see King Robb in person. Others simply stared wide-eyed. The memory of war lingered in each farmer's eyes, but most seemed relieved to see a sign that the North's leadership thrived. On the second day, they stopped at a minor holdfast for a meal, receiving a warm welcome from a local reeve. Catelyn overheard the reeve praising Robb's wise rule, thanking him for preserving farmland from Bolton's terror. The reeve pressed on them a small hamper of smoked fish as a gift. Crossing the plains, they encountered no threats. The men occasionally hunted game, returning with hares or grouse for supper. Spirits remained even, not exactly jubilant but hopeful. Catelyn rode near Robb, occasionally asking if he felt safe. He would nod, eyes scanning the horizon. At times, he wore a pensive look. She guessed he was contemplating the memory of Ned's journey, determined not to repeat mistakes. At Moat Cailin, they paused a full day, greeting the small garrison of Reed Crannogmen who had retaken the fortress from Ironborn occupation some months earlier. The boggy land around it smelled of marsh decay, but the moat itself stood more fortified than last year. A ring of sharpened palisades replaced some battered walls. The Reeds welcomed Robb with respect, though they were reclusive folk, not prone to ceremony. They added 5 men to the escort, all skilled in silent movement and scouting. If the road south turned treacherous, such men might help them slip away. From Moat Cailin, the King's Road turned narrower, winding through the next marshy terrain. Catelyn recalled traveling here years ago, carrying baby Robb in her arms to present him to Ned's family. So much had changed. Now her baby was king. He rode with quiet vigilance, gray wind scouting ahead. Crannogmen guided them past flooded sections, ensuring the wagons didn't sink. By the time they cleared the neck, the men's boots were stained with mud, and the horses caked in swamp grime. But morale held. Entering the Riverlands felt like stepping into a memory. The land was somewhat recovered from war, though pockets of ruin still showed. A scorched barn here, a half-burned mill there. They glimpsed no sign of armies. Brynden Tully's patrols likely kept the region safe. Once again, people emerged to watch the passing cavalcade. Some recognized King Robb, bowing or calling his name. He paused to exchange a few words, though they didn't linger. The mission demanded they continue. They might have diverted to Riverrun, but Robb decided otherwise. Time was pressing, and they didn't want to seem stalling. Instead, they skirted near the hills around the Red Fork, eventually crossing at a fording point that Brynden Tully's men had patrolled. There, they found a small outpost of Tully archers who greeted them warmly. Catelyn's heart tugged at memories of her father's castle, but the group pressed on, aiming to reach the Crownlands in a fortnight. Along the way, they heard scattered rumors from travelers. Some said the Tyrells had begun reorganizing the royal court, pushing Cersei into the background. Others mentioned a possible wedding for King Tommen. He might be betrothed again, possibly to a young lady from a lesser Crownlands house, or even some alliance with Dorne. It was all speculation. The group gleaned no fresh information about Sansa, though one peddler insisted he had heard Baelish was in the Vale, rumored to be betrothed to Lisa Arryn. If Sansa was with him, that might confirm the worst or best. Days stretched into nights. The crisp air of the north gave way to milder southern breezes. Gray wind panted more in the midday heat, though still well short of the stifling summer Catelyn recalled from King's Landing. Autumn here was gentler, the leaves just beginning to turn. They camped each night in cautious rings of watchfires, men sleeping in shifts. Robb insisted on double vigilance at all hours, remembering how easily treachery might strike. But no foes harassed them. The roads seemed eerily peaceful. At last, they reached the outskirts of the Crownlands. Farms became more frequent, occasionally showing the sigils of local lords. Rosby, Ricker, Hayford. Villagers stared at the northern banners with wary surprise. Some recognized the direwolf. Others cowered as if expecting an invasion. But the Knights of Stark gave no cause for alarm. They rode with discipline, ignoring any chance to loot or plunder. Word spread ahead of them that King Robb approached for a parley, not war. One afternoon, nearing the Rosby lands, they encountered a small company of Crown Knights. Their captain announced that Ser Garland Tyrell had dispatched them to guide the northern party to Rosby Hall. Robb's men stiffened at the idea of traveling with Lannister or Tyrell guards, but the captain assured them they would remain at a respectful distance. They bore the sigil of House Tyrell, a golden rose on a green field, and the crowned stag lion of King Tommen. No direct Lannister banner. Catelyn watched them closely. They seemed polite, even gracious, praising King Robb for seeking peace. They escorted the caravan through rolling hills toward Rosby Hall, a modest castle overshadowed by King's Landing spires in the far distance. The Red Keep's silhouette rose behind a haze, a grim reminder of Ned's demise. Despite the mild breeze, Catelyn's stomach clenched at the memory. Robb's face showed tension, but he kept his composure. Rosby Hall stood amid gentle farmland. High stone walls enclosed a keep, smaller than Winterfell but sizable for a lesser lord. Banners of Tyrell and Tommen fluttered at the gate. The Crown Knights signaled for the portcullis to lift, and Robb's party entered a courtyard lined with neatly pruned rose bushes, an odd sight so close to the city. Waiting there, accompanied by a retinue of half-armored men, stood Ser Garland Tyrell. Catelyn recognized him from descriptions. A tall, well-built man with a courteous demeanor, not as flamboyant as his younger brother Loras, rumored to be the famed Knight of Flowers. Garland's face lit in a welcoming smile that seemed genuine. He bowed. "Your Grace, King Robb Stark, welcome to Rosby Hall. I am Garland Tyrell at your service." By the authority of King Tommen, we receive you with all courtesy. Robb dismounted. Grey Wind emerged from behind his horse, hackles only slightly raised. The Tyrell men stared uneasily at the direwolf. Ser Garland's eyes flicked to the beast but maintained composure. Ser Garland, Robb said, matching a polite bow with minimal flourish. I accept your courtesy in good faith. I come to finalize the treaty your men negotiated with ours. May it bring peace to both realms. A throng of watchers, household staff, lesser crown knights, peered from behind pillars or from windows. They seemed simultaneously intrigued and anxious at the presence of the young wolf. The last time a Stark approached King's Landing had led to catastrophic events. But the atmosphere here was calm, no sign of crossbowmen lurking. Come inside, Ser Garland invited. We have prepared sweets for you and your men. We can sup together tonight, discuss details on the morrow. The Crown's delegates are on their way from the city as well. They'll arrive soon. Robb inclined his head, letting a pair of watchers from his side check the stables for potential traps. Satisfied, they led the horses away and the northern men trickled into the keep. Catelyn dismounted with a tightness in her chest. She scanned every corner for hidden aggression. But the hallways were lined with quietly respectful staff, not soldiers. The walls displayed modest tapestries, a boar hunt, a field of roses, a scenic depiction of rolling farmland. Everything felt more like a country retreat than a fortress of betrayal. Garland guided them to spacious chambers on the second floor. Catelyn and Robb each received a private room while the knights bunked in smaller quarters. It was more comfortable than she'd expected, soft beds, fresh linens, a table with bread and salt. A fire crackled in the hearth. A show of hospitality, she murmured. We'll keep watch. Indeed, Robb posted guards in the corridor, doubling the night watch. Grey Wind insisted on sharing Robb's chamber, lying near the foot of the bed. The Tyrell staff seemed to tolerate the wolf's presence with forced goodwill. No one dared protest the king's protective beast. That evening, a supper was laid in Rosby Hall's modest great chamber. Tables arranged in a U-shape with Robb at the head, Ser Garland at his right, and other Tyrell or Rosby men on the left. Catelyn sat near Robb, feeling a tremor of déjà vu. She had once attended banquets in King's Landing's Red Keep only to see them turn monstrous. Yet this meal was simpler: bread, roast duck, greens from local gardens, Tyrell wine, nothing extravagant. Servants moved quietly, refilling cups. In a short welcoming speech, Ser Garland repeated the Crown's desire for peace. He praised the North's bravery and the memory of Ned Stark. He invoked King Tommen's youth as a reason to ensure no new war arose. The realm has bled enough, he said in a calm, earnest voice. We would not see more families torn by strife. Robb responded politely, reaffirming House Stark's desire to remain independent yet at peace. Applause followed. Catelyn observed Garland Tyrell's manner, polite, lacking the arrogance of a typical Lannister ally. She realized he might be the best face the Crown could present, a moderate voice, overshadowed by neither Cersei's cunning nor Marjorie's rumored manipulations. After supper, some stayed for wine. Catelyn excused herself to wander the hall's perimeter, scanning the corners. Tapestries showed scenes from the Rosby family's lineage, nothing of huge note. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see Garland Tyrell approach, offering a gentle smile. My Lady Catelyn Stark, he said. Forgive my forwardness. I wish to speak with you privately. She measured him with a wary eye. Of course, Ser Garland. He cleared his throat. I only wish to say, I was in King's Landing when your lord husband was executed. I stood aside powerless. I regret it deeply. I never believed it was just. My family never condoned it. We came after the fact, forging alliance with the Crown through marriage. It was a pragmatic move. But we do not thirst for the North's downfall. She felt a pang, memories of Ned's final day. I appreciate that. None can undo the past. Only choose better paths now. He nodded. That's precisely what we seek. House Tyrell wants the realm stable with minimal violence. Let the North rule itself if that spares us a renewed war. I cannot speak for Cersei's personal feelings, but she is less powerful than before. We hold the purse strings and King Tommen's regency depends on our backing. If you confirm these terms, I believe we can uphold them in good faith. She inhaled slowly. Then we shall see. If you help us locate my daughter Sansa, Garland's face grew somber. I fear we have no direct lead, only strong suspicion about Peter Baelish. If the Vale is truly closed off, that's the next place to search. The Crown would not oppose you sending an embassy to the Eyrie. Or we might try pressuring Lady Lisa. But Baelish is cunning. I cannot promise success. Only cooperation. Caitlin nodded. Better than nothing. Thank you. He bowed, departing politely. She watched him go, torn by grief and hope. If the Tyrells were honest, the North had a real chance at peace and possibly at applying pressure on the Vale for Sansa's sake. But if this was all a facade, they were deeper in southern webs than ever. Back at the table, Robb had concluded similar small talk with other Crown delegates. They parted for the night, each side retiring. The tension in the air was not quite dissolved, but it was muted by courtesy. The next morning, official negotiations began in Rosby Hall's smaller solar. Caitlin accompanied Robb, along with a half-dozen northern knights. Ser Garland Tyrell led the Crown's side, aided by a few scribes and lesser lords. They produced the treaty parchment newly drafted with the North's requested revisions. Indeed, some phrases about trade taxes had been softened to clarify that the Crown would not impose levies on northern goods traveling south. Robb read it carefully, occasionally conferring with Caitlin or Harwin Glover. Every line reflected the momentous shift. Henceforth, the realm to the south of the Neck is under the sovereignty of King Tommen Baratheon, while the lands and peoples north of the Neck are recognized as the Kingdom of the North under King Robb Stark. The parties swear no hostility, pledge safe travel for merchants, etc. They hammered out final points. The vow that the Crown would not harbor traitors to the north or approach with an army. The vow that the North would remain neutral in southern disputes. At midday, they paused for a meal in the hall. Men joked quietly that they'd never expected to see a Stark sign papers with Lannister seals. But that was the age they lived in, battered by war into forging an improbable peace. In the afternoon session, they read the final language. Then came the signing. Robb stepped forward, took a quill from Ser Garland, and dipped it in black ink. The hall stood silent, watchers holding their breath. In a swift motion, Robb Stark, King in the North, scratched his name across the parchment, then pressed his personal seal, a direwolf's head, into the hot wax. The Crown delegates followed, affixing King Tommen's seal. Applause, quiet at first, then rising, filled the solar. Caitlin let out a tremulous breath. The moment felt unreal. After so much death, so much betrayal, the North was recognized as a sovereign kingdom. She spotted tears in the eyes of some older knights who'd lost sons to the war. This was the peace they had prayed for, delivered not by swords but by words. Ser Garland clasped Robb's hand. The Crown shall keep its word, Your Grace. We will not break faith. The realm needs healing. Robb's expression was resolute, but relief glimmered. Then let this be the day we bury old hatred. The North looks to its own, but we hold no ill will to the South if the South keeps faith. A short ceremony followed, witnessed by scribes. Both sides exchanged copies of the treaty, each sealed with official stamps. The watchers in the room exhaled as though a great weight had lifted. That concluded the formal negotiations. Yet one final matter remained: Sansa Stark. Robb spoke of it plainly, asking if the Crown had any fresh clue. The delegates repeated the rumor that Peter Baelish controlled the Vale through Lady Lisa possibly having married her. They believed Sansa was with him, though had no proof. If House Stark desired to press the Vale, the Crown would not impede them. Nor would the Crown unify with the Vale if the Vale attempted to hinder House Stark's search. That at least was the promise they made. Caitlin forced a polite nod. She knew dealing with Lisa Arryn would be a delicate matter, but at least the Crown would not stand in the way. Perhaps that was enough. They parted with the faint hope that in time the Vale's gates might open. That evening, Rosby Hall erupted in a subdued celebration. Northern Knights and Crown Knights dined side by side, sipping wine or mead. Some laughed as they compared stories of battles. Others debated the best roads for trade. Caitlin moved among them, wearing a simple gray gown, her hair pinned back. She recognized how surreal it all felt. Only a year ago, these factions had tried to slay each other. Now they toasted a new era. Robb and Ser Garland shared a raised table. Garland displayed impeccable courtesy, praising the North's resilience. Robb responded with measured thanks, avoiding false warmth. Over time, though, the tension eased to civility. One or two Crown Knights dared approach Grey Wind, who tolerated them with a stoic look. No feuds erupted. Caitlin realized that for all the old grudges, people had grown exhausted by war. Maybe that exhaustion formed the bedrock of this peace. Late that night, in a small corner of the hall, she found Robb studying the treaty copy. Grey Wind lay at his feet, eyes half-lidded. She set a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "You have done what no Stark has done in centuries. she said softly. Regained the North as a kingdom in law as well as in arms. He glanced up, expression a mix of pride and gravity. It still feels fragile. If the crown changes hands again, if the Vale or Dorne or someone else stirs trouble, if the Tyrells lose control, it could unravel. But for now it stands, she said. And we might search for Sansa without fear of southern armies. He nodded, gaze distant. Our next path is the Vale. Baelish is cunning, but if he indeed has Sansa, we can't ignore it. Maybe in spring, we dispatch a strong embassy to the Eyrie. She squeezed his arm. We will find her. The gods would not allow all our children to be lost forever. He said nothing for a moment, then sighed. I pray you're right. We'll see this peace home, then focus on the Vale. For now, we'll linger here a few days, ensuring no last-minute betrayals. She agreed. Soon enough, they parted to rest. The next morning, they awoke to calm. The crown delegates seemed content. Over the following days, subtle details were hammered out regarding how soon official royal decrees would be announced in King's Landing. Ser Garland assured them that within a fortnight, King Tommen's court would publicly proclaim the North's independence. Some might oppose it, but Tyrell gold and influence would quell dissent. Finally, everything settled. Ser Garland offered to guide Robb to King's Landing to meet Tommen personally, but Robb declined politely. Perhaps in the future, he said, but not yet. Indeed, stepping within those walls was too reminiscent of Ned's final downfall. Ser Garland accepted that with understanding. And thus the time came for the Northmen to depart. The Crown Knights parted ways with them at Rosby's gate, exchanging polite bows. Catelyn rode beside Robb once more, a copy of the treaty safe among their baggage. The crucial next step would be verifying that the crown truly upheld its word. If so, the realm had changed. The king in the north was no longer a rebel but a recognized sovereign. They retraced their path, smaller in number now that no Tyrell escort accompanied them. The mood was lighter, men joking that they carried peace in their saddlebags. Still, they kept alert. The roads felt no less dangerous for carrying parchment. Yet no foe materialized. They passed through the riverlands quickly, pausing only to inform a Tully outpost near the Red Fork that the war was truly ended with the crown. The soldiers there reacted with shock and delight. As they approached Moat Cailin, a letter awaited them. A Crannogman messenger had arrived with a dispatch from Winterfell. The Great John wrote that all was calm, that the harvest was stored for winter, and that he eagerly awaited news of victory. Robb allowed a grin, scribbling a quick note. Mission successful. The North stands recognized. He dispatched it back, the messenger hurrying off. At last, they entered the North proper, greeted by the marshy green of the neck fading to rolling tundra. Catelyn felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. There was a sense of returning home with news that would shape the next century. The men joked about a grand feast in Winterfell to rival Samhain. Robb permitted himself a small, genuine smile, the most relaxed she'd seen him in months. Finally, after many days, they glimpsed Winterfell's towers rising against a crisp sky. The fortress had never looked so strong. Stone walls fully restored, banners flying. The gates swung open as the outriders recognized the king's party. Cheering erupted from the courtyard. Word had spread that the king returned. People crowded around, eager to see if the mission brought triumph or tragedy. Robb raised a hand, calling for hush. He dismounted, gray wind at his side, and faced the throng. Catelyn slid off her horse, standing by him. The Great John emerged from the gates, beaming wide. "Your Grace," he boomed. "Have you done it?" Robb nodded firmly, voice ringing clear. "Yes, the crown acknowledges our independence. The North is free." A thunderous cheer shook the courtyard. Some men flung their caps in the air. Women embraced each other. Children danced. Catelyn's heart swelled. She spotted Asha Greyjoy off to one side, arms folded, a wry grin on her lips, perhaps marveling that the Starks had achieved what the Ironborn never did. Even the Great John wiped a tear, roaring victory. For the next hour, chaos reigned as the returning party recounted the details. Scribes read from the treaty's text, to more cheers. The Great John promised an immediate celebration that night. Catelyn slipped aside, letting the official hubbub swirl. She found a quiet corner near the newly repaired southwestern breach, remembering how Bolton's men once stormed here. Now the North stood recognized, unthreatened by southern claims. She closed her eyes, murmuring thanks to the old gods for guiding them through so many storms. In the great hall that evening, men raised tankards in boisterous toasts. Harps and drums accompanied a lively tune. Ale and wine flowed more freely than usual. The Great John recounted how Walder Frey's betrayal turned on itself, how Tywin Lannister was cast down, how Bolton died. Each step led to this night, a final acknowledgement from the Iron Throne that the North would never kneel again. Robb presided from the high seat, offering calm words of gratitude to the people. He singled out the Great John, Ser Wendell Manderly, Harwin Glover, Rick Umber, and many others for their service. The crowd cheered them all. Catelyn watched from a seat near the dais, pride and relief mingling in her chest. Through near extinction, House Stark had not only survived but won. Eventually, the Great John demanded that the king give a speech. Robb rose, raising his cup, gray wind at his feet. The hall hushed, men leaning in. "My lords, ladies, good folk of the North," he began. "We've endured betrayals, battles, heartbreaks. We lost father and kin. Our walls were nearly torn down. Yet we stand unbroken, recognized by those who once demanded our subjugation. This victory belongs not to me alone, but to every man, woman, and child who refused to submit." Thunderous applause rang out. Robb lifted a hand for silence, continuing, "We claim no dominion over the South. We ask only the right to rule ourselves, free from those who would chain us. May this treaty hold for generations. And may we never forget the price we paid. Let us not thirst for conquest, but guard our own, ensuring our children never see the horrors we have known." The cheer that followed was deafening, men stamping feet, banging cups on tables. Catelyn blinked tears away. In that moment, she saw in Robb echoes of Ned's quiet sense of duty, tempered by the young king's own fiery will. The war had forged him into a leader who valued peace as much as any champion's glory. The night wore on in revelry. Eventually, the hall emptied of the rowdiest revelers. Torches burned low. Catelyn found Robb seated on the dais step, stroking Grey Wind's fur, staring into the dying fire. She approached, lowered herself beside him. "Congratulations, my king," she teased gently. He made a soft sound, half laugh, half sigh. "We did it, mother. But I can't help feeling incomplete. Sansa is still missing, and the realm remains fragile. The Vale might hide her, or Baelish might exploit her. Arya, Bran, Rickon, all absent. We have peace, but not wholeness." She set a hand on his shoulder. "We've a foundation. Our homeland is safe. Now we can search for them without armies breathing down our neck. Step by step." He nodded, gaze distant. "Yes. Step by step. The old gods have not guided us this far to abandon us now." They sat in companionable silence, Grey Wind resting his head on Robb's lap, the hearth's embers glowing orange. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of celebration, men still toasting in side chambers. The flicker of the torches revealed the hall's repaired arches, a testament to how the North had rebuilt itself. Catelyn recalled the day she first arrived in Winterfell, a shy bride from the Riverlands. She never imagined that one day her son would be crowned king in the North, forging a new chapter for a land once forcibly integrated into the Targaryen realm. So much heartbreak lay behind them, but a path forward shone. She whispered a final prayer that the old gods might bless their next quest, to find Sansa, Arya, and any missing children, to unify a family sundered by war. At length, Robb stood, offering her a hand to rise. "Come, we should rest. Tomorrow we begin planning. With the South no longer a threat, we can address the Vale or even approach Lisa directly." She took his hand, letting him pull her up. "One step at a time," she repeated, voice soft. He nodded, guiding her across the hall, Grey Wind padding behind. The half-burned tapestries overhead now replaced by new ones, the floor freshly strewn with sweet-smelling rushes, the pillars illuminated with confidence rather than fear. Winterfell was no longer a battlefield or a ruin. It was a seat of a kingdom, one recognized by a battered, weary realm that had capitulated to House Stark's resilience. Tomorrow, they would face the puzzle of Sansa, the Vale, and the uncertain future, but for tonight, the castle seemed at peace. In the corridors, men dozed or hummed content tunes. She parted ways with Robb near the stairs, each heading to their chambers. The last echo in the hall was Grey Wind's quiet click of claws on stone, an oddly comforting sound that reminded her the wolves truly had endured. Day after day, the new era settled over the north. Word spread to outlying houses that the crown recognized them. Some lords responded with a mixture of disbelief and jubilation. In White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderley held feasts celebrating the new trade possibilities. In the far north, the Umbers boasted that the entire South had finally learned not to meddle with northern wolves. The people's mood, once overshadowed by war, now brightened with the promise of stability. Within Winterfell, a sense of relief permeated. The threat of southern invasion vanished, replaced by talk of forging beneficial trade routes, White Harbor shipping northern timber, fish, and furs to the Crownlands in exchange for coin, wine, and goods. Already caravans increased, traveling under safe conduct from the Tyrell-led crown. The Great Hall's storehouses grew with new supplies that once had been scarce. Robb wasted no time focusing on what he deemed the next priority, Sansa's fate. On the third day after their triumphant return, he summoned key advisors, including the Great John, Catelyn, Ser Wendell Manderley, Harwin Glover, and even Asha Greyjoy for her perspective on infiltration or negotiation. They gathered in the Solar, a map of Westeros laid out. Robb pointed to the Vale's mountainous border. Every rumor suggests Sansa is with Peter Baelish or Lady Lysa. If the Vale is truly locked, we might need to force open negotiations. But the Crown stated they will not hamper us if we choose to approach the Eyrie. So, do we send an embassy? Or do I go in person? Catelyn pressed her lips, recalling Lysa's reclusive nature. My sister refused aid during the war, hiding behind the Vale's mountains. She might see a large approach as a threat. Perhaps a small envoy is better. I might lead it as her sister. If she is Sansa, she might not feel menaced by me. The Great John frowned. She's a queer one, from what I hear. If Baelish truly married her, he might control access. He's cunning, might try to keep you out. Ser Wendell nodded. But with the Crown's recognition, Baelish can't brand you as outlaws. He might still stall. We have to proceed carefully. Robb shifted, studying the map. We can't let them vanish behind the Bloody Gate. If we fail to retrieve Sansa by words, do we threaten force? That might break the peace we just won. Catelyn's voice trembled slightly. Let me try first with minimal men. A handful of loyal knights for safety. Lysa might open the Vale if she sees her sister, not an invading host. Should she refuse, we can determine another path. Perhaps the Crown would back us diplomatically. He studied her with a mixture of protectiveness and respect. You'd risk traveling alone into Lysa's domain? After all we endured. She mustered a small, sad smile. For Sansa, yes. Lysa is my sister. Despite her fears, we share blood. She once listened to me. If Baelish tries to block me, well, I'll know he's hiding something. A hush fell. The Great John huffed. Better you take a few swords, my lady. This Vale is treacherous. If Baelish is involved, cunning might overshadow familial bonds. She nodded. Of course, I won't go unguarded. But not so large a group as to alarm them. If the Vale harbors Sansa, we aim for a peaceful resolution, not a siege. Robb's expression remained pensive. Then he exhaled. So be it. We'll plan an embassy. Mother, you lead it with a small retinue. Travel after winter's threat fades. The passes to the Eyrie can be dangerous in cold months. In the meantime, we gather what intelligence we can. If Baelish is indeed married to Lysa, we must unravel how he wields power there. They agreed. The Great John, who disliked trusting Lady Lysa at all, acknowledged that a small approach might do less harm than an armed host. Asha Greyjoy, leaning by the fireplace, commented, no doubt Baelish is spinning webs. Be prepared for illusions. If I were you, I'd keep a backup plan. But then, you're not me. Catelyn nodded. We will be cautious, I assure you. So the immediate mission concluded. House Stark would let winter pass, ensure the roads and mountain passes were safer, then dispatch Catelyn with a modest escort to treat with Lysa and, hopefully, find Sansa. In the meantime, the north stabilized. Letters from the south confirmed that King Tommen's court had publicly announced the separation, describing it as a mutual accord ensuring realm-wide tranquility. The realm stirred with rumor, but no direct challengers emerged to contest it. Winter's early snows drifted over the north, though milder than some dreaded. Fields lay dormant, barns filled with harvest produce. Winterfell's routine focused on maintenance, training, and limited building projects. The newly recognized kingdom faced no external threats. People praised King Robb the Peacemaker, a shift from the young wolf war cry. Catelyn often heard minstrels singing ballads about House Stark's perseverance, though she never forgot the cost. Robb, well aware that the realm's stability could be fleeting, pressed on with tasks, appointing justices to roam the north, punishing banditry, forging trade deals with White Harbor, encouraging lesser houses to rebuild roads. He also oversaw a formal ceremony in the Great Hall where lords reaffirmed oaths to House Stark as an independent monarchy. Even old grudges diminished in the face of a new era. A hush of resolution colored Catelyn's days. She performed her role as Queen Mother, guiding local disputes, comforting families who still mourned war dead, and quietly preparing for the eventual journey to the Vale. Each dawn, she visited the Godwood where the hot spring misted around the Heart Tree. She prayed for Arya, for Bran and Rickon, lost beyond the knowledge of the living. For Sansa, possibly under Baelish's manipulations. She prayed the peace would last so they might focus on reuniting the family. In time, letters arrived from King's Landing containing official copies of the final treaty. Tyrell courtiers penned flowery introductions, praising King Tommen's wisdom in granting the North independence. A red wax seal bearing Tommen's crowned staglion validated it. The letter also expressed hopes for future cooperation in locating Sansa Stark. No direct mention of the Lannisters' prior crimes, very convenient. But it was a testament to how thoroughly the realm had shifted. Robb read the new letters in the Great Hall before assembled lords. The crowd cheered, though the older ones, like the Great Jon, spat at the mention of Tommen's wisdom, recalling Joffrey's atrocities. Nonetheless, it was official. The Iron Throne had parted ways with the North. The Great Jon roared that they should hold a feast in commemoration. Robb politely declined a lavish event, mindful of the winter's looming presence. But smaller gatherings flourished, men reveling in the fact that no armies marched upon them. One day, as the snows thickened, Asha Greyjoy approached Catelyn in a corridor near the newly refurbished library tower. The guard followed as always, but Asha signaled him to stand a few steps away. The Ironborn woman faced Catelyn with an odd mixture of defiance and sincerity. "My lady," she said, "I see the realm has changed. You are no longer at war with the crown. House Greyjoy is scattered, father dead, my uncle Euron doing gods know what on the Isles. I stand here a prisoner. Tell me, do you mean to keep me caged forever?" Catelyn regarded her carefully. The question had lingered on her mind for months. "We have not had a chance to address your fate with all that happened. If we set you free, do you return to the Isles and spark more raids?" Asha shook her head. "I want no more part in Euron's madness. The Iron Islands might tear themselves apart. My father's war is ended. I lost my men, my father, my brother Theon presumably lost as well. Enough. I'd sail somewhere far if I could. Maybe the Stepstones, maybe Bravos. If you require an oath not to raid the North, I'll give it." Catelyn studied her eyes, searching for guile. She saw mostly weariness, a war-torn soul who had lost everything. "An oath is easily broken." Asha's lips twisted. "True. But you hold me here for what purpose? If it's revenge for Theon's crimes, fine. But you have bigger concerns, reuniting your family, forging peace. Let me go. I can sign some parchment, swear never to harm the North again. If I break it, you can claim a breach of your own peace." Catelyn waited. Asha had not personally committed atrocities at Winterfell, Theon had. War had forced them all into corners. With the North's independence secure, it might be an act of clemency to let her go, provided the Ironborn had no impetus to strike again. If Asha truly sought a new life, imprisoning her forever served no purpose. "I will speak to Robb," Catelyn said quietly. "We may require you to sign a pledge of non-aggression, witnessed by lords. If you truly wish to depart for the east, we might give you a small ship from White Harbor. But if you return with raiders, you forfeit your life." Asha inclined her head. "I accept. Thank you, my lady. War is done." She glanced at the guard, then turned away, lips pursed as if in thought. When Catelyn shared this conversation with Robb, he took it under advisement. The Great Jon muttered that an Ironborn was never to be trusted, but Robb saw the logic. With the realm changed, Asha's captivity no longer served a strategic end. Perhaps letting her depart sealed one more rift. They decided to wait until spring's thaw, then quietly release her under oath. If she broke it, the North stood ready to strike. Winter's grip tightened. Snow blanketed the fields outside Winterfell, and the farmland stilled. Within the walls, a hush of routine carried them through the darkest nights, meals around the great hall fires, occasional music to lighten spirits, nightly watch on the ramparts. No southern foe arrived to disturb them. Ravens from King's Landing insisted all was calm, the Tyrells focusing on southern issues. The realm might not have been wholly at peace, but the North was blessedly untouched by new conflict. In that lull, Robb reaffirmed a date in early spring for Catelyn's journey to the Vale. He dispatched letters to the heir, politely requesting an audience with Lady Lysa, citing the new treaty's recognition of free passage. If Lysa refused, that would reveal Baelish's influence. Meanwhile, the North braced for news. Catelyn found solace in small tasks. Winter orchard care, distributing stored food to families in need, and guiding the stonemasons continuing minor repairs. She also oversaw tasks in the library, saving what knowledge the war had not destroyed. Each day, she paused in the godswood, snow drifting around the heart tree. The memory of her absent children lingered, but a fragile hope glowed in her heart. Freed from the crown's threat, House Stark could search for them. Arya rumored to roam the Riverlands or beyond, Bran and Rickon rumored to be alive, though no one knew where. Sansa potentially in the Vale. The North's new freedom gave them at least a chance to reclaim what was lost. Spring loomed at last, signaled by the drip of meltwater from the eaves and the slow thaw of roads. The Great John oversaw a large Winter's End festival to lift spirits. It was not as lavish as the Samhain feast, but men gathered to exchange stories, share new calves born in the cold, plan next season's planting. Asha Greyjoy was conspicuously absent, presumably in her chamber under guard, biding her time for release. Robb kept a watchful eye on all rumors from the Vale or King's Landing. So far, none. The South seemed quiet. Finally, in the second moon of spring, a raven arrived from the eyrie. Lysa's seal was pressed in pale wax, the letter short. She acknowledged receiving House Stark's request, stated that the Vale was not open to uninvited visitors. But if Catelyn came alone with minimal guard, they might grant an audience. The tone was chilly, typical of Lysa's reclusive stance. No mention of Sansa, no mention of Baelish. It was enough, though, to spur the plan forward. Robb scowled, reading the letter. She offers no courtesy, yet doesn't forbid you. Might be a trap. Catelyn sighed. Lysa is my sister. I pray she wouldn't harm me. But Baelish, who knows what strings he pulls. I must go, or we learn nothing. He pressed his lips tight. I'd send you with more men, but that might provoke her. She offered a small, resolute smile. I'll take a half-dozen knights, no more. Enough to protect me from bandits, not enough to threaten the eyrie. Let me rely on blood ties to keep me safe. The Great John growled, blood ties mean little if Baelish sees a chance for advantage. Let me come. Catelyn shook her head. No. The Ares' approach is treacherous. If they see an Umber giant looming, they might panic. We need subtlety. Reluctantly, the Great John relented. Robb authorized a small hand-picked group, including a loyal Stark knight named Pattern, a Serwyn man, and a few others. They would accompany Catelyn from Winterfell to the Bloody Gate. If Lysa allowed entry, they would proceed up the high road. Otherwise, they would return. Thus preparations began. The roads would be muddy but passable. They aimed to depart in a fortnight. Meanwhile, Catelyn penned a short letter to Lysa, politely confirming her approach, explaining the small escort. She prayed Lysa's maternal side might welcome a sister's quest to reclaim a lost niece. If that failed, they might need the new crown's help in forcing Baelish's hand. But that was a last resort. Amid these swirling plans, time carried forth. Winterfell's courtyard sparkled under melting snow. People bustled with new life, patching up the farmland for spring planting. Robb oversaw a quiet sense of optimism, no war. For the first time in years, the North's swords were at rest. The new king in the North turned his eyes to uniting the realm behind him, not by conquest but by mutual support. He wrote to loyal houses, instructing them to be vigilant but not aggressive. He also corresponded with Castle Black, sending what supplies he could spare, reaffirming that the North's independence did not mean abandoning the Watch. The far North needed help, rumored sightings of strange whites still stirring. On a mild morning, after final goodbyes, Catelyn and her small retinue departed Winterfell for the Vale. Robb embraced her at the gate, gray wind nuzzling her cloak. The Grey John gave a rueful grin, wishing her luck. Asha Greyjoy watched from a balcony, expression unreadable. Then the gate opened and Catelyn Stark rode out, determined to scale the Vale's mountains and face her sister for the sake of Sansa. The Watchers cheered quietly, though they recognized the peril. Traveling the King's Road south felt almost routine now. Fewer men than before, but enough to deter bandits. The muddy fields glistened in post-winter sunlight. The group kept a decent pace, crossing the neck at Moat Cailin, where Crannogmen greeted them. Catelyn found it surreal how often she'd traversed these bogs recently compared to her younger years. Each trip felt like a step deeper into fate. Once they cleared the neck, she parted ways from the main road that led to Riverrun or Rosby. Instead, they angled east, heading for the Vale's gateway. The roads there were less traveled, but no hostilities barred them. Occasional travelers gawked at the dire wolf banner. Yes, they still flew it, a small sign of their identity. They encountered minimal trouble, just muddy paths and a few suspicious local lords who demanded to see letters. Catelyn produced a short note indicating she traveled to see Lady Lysa, nothing more. Eventually, they reached the foothills near the Bloody Gate. The Vale's towering peaks loomed overhead, still capped in snow. The wind turned chill as they ascended narrow roads. Catelyn recalled her previous visits some decades past. Then Lysa had been a young bride of Jon Arryn. Now she was a widow rumored to have married Petyr Baelish. The Vale had grown more paranoid. They arrived at the Bloody Gate to find Vale guards who bristled at the sight of a northern banner. Catelyn announced her identity, sister to Lady Lysa. The guards conferred, looking uneasy. Finally, they let her pass, though they insisted the escort be minimal. They said a guide would accompany them up the high road. Tension spiked among Catelyn's men, but she insisted on compliance. Thus began the treacherous climb. The high road to the Eyrie twisted along cliffs, sometimes no wider than a horse's length. The Vale guide, a sullen man wearing House Arryn's sigil, led them, barking warnings about falling rocks. Over 2 days, they wound upward, flanked by deep ravines. Catelyn's knights eyed each turn warily, aware of how easy an ambush would be. But no attack came. She thought of the stories of how the mountain clans once raided travelers. Perhaps Baelish or Lysa's men had them subdued. At last, they glimpsed the Eyrie perched high above, its pale stone walls blending with the sky. Snow swirled around the upper peaks. The road ended at Stone, the first waypoint. They dismounted, checking in with Eyrie guards who demanded they leave their horses behind for mules. Step by step, they ascended the narrow steps carved into the mountainside, cresting at the Eyrie's formidable gates. Inside, the courtyard was austere, a smaller space than Winterfell but perched in the heavens. Servants wearing Arryn colors scurried about. Catelyn's breath condensed in the chill air, the altitude biting. Her half-dozen knights pressed close, hearts pounding at the vulnerability. If Lysa willed it, one command could see them thrown from these heights. She prayed her sister would not be so mad. A steward approached, bowing stiffly. "Welcome, Lady Catelyn. Lady Lysa awaits you in the high hall." They exchanged looks. The steward indicated her men must remain behind, except perhaps one companion. She recognized how cunning this was. She hesitated, recalling Walder Frey's false courtesy, but she had come this far. She turned to her knights, choosing the one she trusted most, Pattern. The rest waited under watch in the courtyard. So Catelyn climbed the final steps, Pattern behind her, until they reached the Eyrie's high hall. The sweeping chamber opened onto a moon door in the floor, a gaping CIR. CLE that looked down thousands of feet. She shuddered at the memory of hearing how Lysa used it to cast foes to their death. Pale morning light bathed the marble pillars. There, upon the high hall's dais, stood Lysa Arryn, robed in blue and white silks. Her hair was pinned up, though streaked with more gray than Catelyn recalled. Beside her, fidgeting on a lesser seat, was Robin Arryn, her son, looking frail and anxious. And on Lysa's other side, Petyr Baelish. Baelish wore a modest doublet of black, a sly smile curling his lips. Catelyn's heart twisted in apprehension, recalling how once he had professed love for her in youth. The rumors of his marriage to Lysa evidently were true. She saw a ring glinting on his finger. "Cat," Lysa said, voice pinched. "You've come after all these years." Catelyn forced a calm approach, ignoring Baelish's smug gaze. "Sister," she said gently, "thank you for receiving me." Lysa eyed her with something like resentment and longing combined. "Well, you wrote you had urgent matters. Let's not keep the day from us. Speak, then go. The Vale prefers its isolation." Robin Arryn peeked at Catelyn, then sank back, seemingly uninterested. Petyr Baelish stepped forward with a slight bow. "My lady, it warms my heart to see you safe in these troubled times. Welcome to the Eyrie." She forced civility. "Lord Baelish, your presence is noted." Faint smirk. "We do what we must to ensure Lady Lysa's domain is secure. The Eyrie stands inviolate." Catelyn drew a calming breath. "I come about my daughter, Sansa. Rumor claims you, Lord Baelish, took her from King's Landing. The crown believes she might be here, or in your care. If so, let me see her at once." A hush. Baelish's dark eyes gleamed. Lysa's face tightened. "We have no Sansa here," she said. "Why would we hide your child? The Vale has no place for meddling in your northern woes." "I told you that." Catelyn's heart sank. She studied Baelish. He wore an expression of polite denial. "But rumor is strong. The crown itself says Sansa was last seen fleeing with you." He shrugged elegantly. "She was indeed found at King's Landing's fiasco after Joffrey's wedding, but she escaped my grasp. I tried to help her flee the city's cruelty, yes, but she vanished en route. I know not where she is now." A raw edge of frustration flared in Catelyn's voice. "So you claim. Pardon me if I'm reluctant to trust your word." He inclined his head with feigned regret. "You wound me, dear cat. I only did what I thought best for your daughter." Lysa sniffed. "If she's missing, it's not our fault. We can't save every stray. The Vale has problems of its own. Perhaps the girl is in Bravos or the Riverlands. Have you checked?" Catelyn stifled a retort. She recognized Lysa's defensive posture, as if protecting Baelish's secrets. "I've scoured the realm in rumor. King's Landing, the crown's new piece, all point to you. Why not help me, sister? We can end this swiftly if Sansa truly hides here." Lysa's eyes flicked to Robin, who dozed in partial disinterest. Then she said sharply, "We do not shelter Sansa. The Vale is closed. If she wanders out there, let her come on her own. We owe no hospitality to a potential threat." "Threat?" Catelyn repeated, incredulous. "Your own niece is a threat?" Peter intervened smoothly, stepping forward. "Lysa fears that bringing Sansa here might provoke the Lannisters or other forces. We cannot risk the Vale's neutrality." A swirl of anger rose in Catelyn. She realized the conversation was going nowhere. They denied Sansa's presence, possibly lying. She decided to press. "The North is recognized as an independent kingdom. We have no quarrel with you. If you had Sansa, the crown wouldn't come for her. She's no threat to you. I beg you, if she's here, let me see her." Lysa's expression turned icy. "Enough. I told you. She is not here. If that's your only reason to darken my doors, then be gone." "The Vale stands apart from your petty politics." Robin yawned, mumbling something about wanting to see them fly from the moon door. Catelyn suppressed a shiver. Baelish gave a gracious bow. "Lady Catelyn, I'm sorry we can't help. We wish you well." In that moment, she saw their duplicity, or at least a portion of it. Either Sansa truly wasn't here, meaning Baelish had hidden her somewhere else, or she was well concealed. Lysa's body language, half trembling, half furious, suggested hidden fear. Possibly Baelish had manipulated her to keep silent. Catelyn realized pressing further risked an ugly outcome. With no choice, she bowed stiffly, voice quivering. "Then I have done my duty. If you hear word of Sansa, I implore you to inform me. We came in peace." Baelish's eyes gleamed. "Of course, dear cat. The moment we learn anything, we'll send a raven. Good day." Lysa turned away, dismissing them. Guards stepped forward, guiding Catelyn and Pattern out. The tense finality of it stung. She had ventured so far, only to find a locked door of lies. They descended the mountain in silence. Her knights in the courtyard glimpsed her face and needed no words to see the result. By dusk, they were on the high road again, hearts heavy. The Vale had offered no solution. If Sansa was indeed with Baelish, he had hidden her well. If she was truly gone, this was a dead end. Weary and heartsore, they retraced their steps out of the Vale, crossing the bloody gate unharassed. A sense of defeat lay over the small party. Catelyn could only think, if not in the Eyrie, where? Baelish might have placed Sansa in some secret estate or even smuggled her abroad. The search felt impossible. Perhaps the only recourse was to rely on the Crown's new pledge to help or to dispatch cunning agents to track Baelish's moves. War might be over, but the heartbreak remained. They rode north, a journey of weeks through the Riverlands, then the Neck. No armies barred their way, no storms of crossbows. Just quiet towns, battered by war but slowly rebuilding. Each village reminded Catelyn how the North had survived. She found solace only in the knowledge that at least the Vale had not turned violent against them. The new crown wouldn't side with Baelish if he was truly lying. That might help in time. At last, they reached Moat Cailin, where Crannogmen gave them shelter for a night. The next day, they traversed the final stretch to Winterfell, re-entering its gates with a somber mood. Robb awaited them in the courtyard, worry on his face. Grey Wind stood by him, hackles slightly raised as if sensing bad news. When Catelyn dismounted, he approached. "Mother, what news?" She lowered her gaze. "They deny everything. Lysa claims Sansa isn't there. Baelish feigned ignorance. I saw no sign. If they have her, she's hidden. Or she was never there at all." Robb's jaw clenched. Then another dead end. She nodded, heart aching. "I'm sorry." His eyes hardened with quiet resolve. "We'll not give up, but this path is closed. For now at least. Perhaps we'll find another clue." Meanwhile, the realm stands at peace, the north free. She exhaled a trembling breath. "Yes, let's be thankful for that. And hope the next lead on Sansa is less elusive." In the great hall that evening, the sad tale was recounted, no progress in the Vale. The Greyjoy cursed Baelish's name. Men fumed that Lysa Arryn had turned her back. But ultimately, no impetus to fight the Vale existed. House Stark's small party emerged unscathed. That had to suffice. By lamplight, Robb stared at the map, shaking his head. The Crown recognized our realm. The Vale is separate. The Iron Islands remain under Euron's uncertain rule. The realm is a patchwork. Our missing siblings remain scattered. We've ended one war to face 1,000 smaller puzzles. Catelyn set a hand on his. Yet the worst is behind us. We can rebuild, watch, and wait. If the Vale eventually cracks under Baelish's manipulations, maybe Sansa will slip free or we'll discover new leads. We have the time now, unthreatened by southern blades. He gave a slow nod, lips firming. Yes, we hold the north. We uphold our duty. Sansa, Bran, Rickon, Arya, somewhere, they are alive. We'll keep searching. If new knowledge arises, we'll seize it. For now, let's guard our realm from within, ensuring no new threats unravel this peace. Outside, a faint wind whipped across the battlements, stirring the newly minted Stark banners. The keep's walls stood strong, the southwestern breach fully integrated, the echo of crossbow bolts replaced by the hum of everyday life. Through heartbreak and cunning, House Stark had rewritten the realm's tapestry, forging an independent north recognized by the Iron Throne. Many once thought that impossible. Yet it was done. Catelyn bowed her head, murmuring thanks to the old gods. They had come a long way since the near-red wedding betrayal. Walder Frey's plan undone, Tywin Lannister's hold broken, Bolton's siege crushed. Now the Lannisters ceded the north to Stark. A year prior, such an outcome seemed unimaginable. The cost in blood was terrible, but perhaps something hopeful grew from it. In the days that followed, the routine of peace resumed. Men patrolled roads, stonemasons improved towers, farmland sprouted under gentle spring rains. Asha Greyjoy was quietly released, signing a vow of non-aggression. Robb gave her passage to White Harbor, from which she sailed on a small vessel eastward. Before departing, she offered Catelyn a curt but genuine thank you, vanishing to carve her destiny across the seas. As the year turned, the North stood firm in a fragile but recognized independence. Rumors from King's Landing occasionally arrived, citing petty feuds at court, but none threatened House Stark. The Vale remained closed, the area unyielding to any further plea. The search for Sansa remained unsolved. Yet hope lingered that someday Baelish's web would unravel. Winterfell thrived, a beacon of resilience. Each sunrise saw markets bustling, blacksmiths hammering new tools, children racing across the courtyard with wooden swords, imagining themselves as future knights of a free north. The great Jon watched them with a paternal grin, remembering how real swords once stained this yard with blood. That was the difference a year could make. From the brink of ruin to the dawn of a new era. Robb Stark, the young wolf turned peacemaker, navigated daily governance with a steady hand. He met challenges, bandits in distant corners, occasional disputes with small lords, but no overshadowing crisis. Catelyn observed him quietly, swelling with maternal pride. She kept the memory of Ned close, feeling sure he'd be proud of their son's strength and justice. Still, from time to time, nightmares of the Red Keep haunted her. She'd wake, heart pounding, recalling Ned's final moments. Then she'd recall how, through cunning and luck, the Starks reversed the next attempts at slaughter, overcame Frey and Bolton, and forced the crown to bend. She reminded herself that they had not wasted Ned's sacrifice. The children who remained free carried forward House Stark's name, forging a legacy that might stand for centuries. On a certain afternoon, she wandered the Godswood, listening to the soft gurgle of the hot spring. Snow no longer blanketed the roots, replaced by patches of green moss. The heart tree's carved face gazed silently, red sap glistening at the corners of its eyes. She knelt by the trunk, pressing her palm against the rough bark. The swirl of steam formed a halo around her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for guiding us through the war, for letting my son outlive the treacheries that claimed Ned. If you will, old gods, bring back my lost children. Let this family be whole." A gentle wind stirred the leaves, as though acknowledging her plea. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. In that hush, she felt the presence of all that House Stark had endured. The betrayal at the twins reversed, Tywin's downfall at Riverrun, the Ironborn repelled from Moat Cailin, Bolton's siege undone at Winterfell, the realm's last acceptance that the North would not kneel. Each victory was carved from heartbreak, each heartbreak forging new resilience. Rising, she wiped her cheeks. The day's mild sunshine filtered through the canopy. The hush of the gods would mingled with a hint of birdsong. She recalled how Ned once prayed here, a stoic figure kneeling in the quiet. She pictured him smiling gently, approving of what the family had accomplished. She whispered, "We'll keep trying, Ned. We won't stop." Outside, the yard bustled with stable hands brushing horses, a few archers practicing with straw targets, sparks flying from the blacksmith's forge. Robb conferred with a group of lesser lords near the main doors, presumably planning how to expand farmland near the winter town. When he saw her, he gave a small wave, a sign that the immediate crisis was behind them, that daily life now prevailed. She joined him in that swirl of activity, giving instructions to a steward about supply inventories, then accepting a letter from the new roving judges who upheld laws in outlying hamlets. Each step reminded her how far they'd come, from war councils to normal administration. Some might say it was dull, but she found it a blessed relief. And so the new kingdom in the north settled into a steady rhythm. The treaty with the crown held firm, with each side wary but so far upholding their vows. Sansa's whereabouts remained elusive, but they had not given up. Arya, Bran, Rickon might yet surface. House Stark commanded the loyalty of all northern houses, forging quiet prosperity under Robb's balanced rule. Asha Greyjoy was gone, Bolton was dead, Walder Frey undone. Old nightmares gave way to the season's gentler dreams. In the great hall's evenings, men sometimes sang of how the Red Wedding had been meant to slaughter the Starks but instead devoured Walder Frey. Others recounted the cunning that toppled Tywin's designs. The king in the north listened, wearing a faint half-smile, telling them not to dwell too much on bloodshed. If a new generation only knew of peace, that would be the greatest monument to House Stark's resilience. And so it stood, with the north unbowed, winter staved off by a fleeting lull, the realm parted in two crowns, Tommen in the south, Robb in the north. No one knew how the far future might judge this moment. Yet for now, the bannermen of the north walked proudly, the old nightmares banished from Winterfell's yards. Day by day, stone by stone, heartbreak by heartbreak, House Stark had built something new, a kingdom of the Northmen, recognized by old foes who once swore they'd see the wolves exterminated. Instead, the direwolf banners flew high, a silent testament that from the Red Wedding's near carnage to the final siege at Winterfell, no betrayal could end the legacy of Ned Stark. And Catelyn, mother to a king, carried on, hopeful that somewhere her scattered children might learn there was a home for them still, a place that no foe dared threaten again. The future, though uncertain, shimmered with possibilities. Winterfell's repaired towers crowned the horizon, defiant and proud. The old gods listened in the steam of the godwood. The daily routine overshadowed the old horrors, forging a realm that might, if fortune held, remain free and vigilant. In that hush of new beginnings, House Stark's story continued, shaped by the wisdom gained from every betrayal that ended not in the wolves' extinction but in their enduring triumph.